Good morning. Good morning, good morning, good morning, good morning, good morning. Good morning, everyone. Hello, hello. Check, check, check. Can you hear me? Check, check, check. Check, check, check. Can you hear me? ちょっと待ってください。Shouldn't be doing this on stream, but I woke up late as usual. Ooh, ooh. Whose pants did my retainer just stole? Gotta wash it first. Okay. Hello, guys. Oh, I realized one thing. I took off my hat because it's way too awesome. So, I think I'm going to wear fake glasses. Is it fake when it's there? Oh yeah, hell yeah, hell yeah. Yeah. Okay, okay. There you go. There you go. Yeah. Cool. It looks so good. Alright. I woke up late. Twisty, my manager. My manager. Had to call. And I have two managers, okay? And two moderators. Twisty and Deanne are my managers. Deanne couldn't make it for the third consecutive day. Wait, 2 days. I think Deanne was here on the first day. She's busy, okay? She's like a super busy person. Anyway. Okay, what was I saying? Okay. Let me put my phone sound down a little bit. How y'all doing? Good morning. Everyone, okay, you know what? I'm like super. I've never been a very fear of missing out person. I usually just do things my own pace, but lately it's been really crawling at me that everyone is traveling and then I'm not. I'm just sitting here. But then I just came back from like 3 weeks in another country. I don't know what I'm thinking. I'm just selfish, I guess. Then I would I really need to plan a solo trip to somewhere. I really need to, just for my own sake, you know. Anyway, it's my coffee, just exactly how I would be. Right, I am right now. Cup of coffee, cup of tea, lip balm. I bought a Nintendo Switch lately and I haven't played it. I mean, I played it for a bit. I had like Animal Crossing in it, but I feel very pressured. Like, kind of like, I'm not pressured, but like more like, wow, like I have to start an island and all that. Like, I've seen how hard it is for other people, so I'm like kind of like scared to do it. But I will do it. I'm definitely looking for like a capture card. So if anyone has any recommendations, can you let me know? Not too expensive. I found one myself. It might work. We'll see. Um, when I think I'll buy it like next month or something. Just wondering if anyone would be interested in watching me play Animal Crossing about like fucking decade later. No, just like 3 years after it's like super hyped up. Now they don't even have new updates. Anyway, I'm babbling. I'm already late, but I'm babbling. what am I saying? There are a lot of games I want to play on the Switch. I'm very glad that I got the dock version because it's like multiplayer and everything. So next time Twisty and I can play a lot of stupid games together, like Overcooked or something. Um. Anyway. Uh. Okay. Today we are reading Kazuo Ishiguro When We Were Orphan, Part 4. Part 4. Part 4. Is the third part in the entire book that I'm going to read today because the others are way too long. If I read the entirety of the book right now, I'll die. Probably will take like 4 or 5 hours probably. So we're gonna read today, and also we will finish it up next Monday. Most probably. I'm thinking. Yeah. Yep. So we are currently reading Kazuo Ishiguro's When We Were Orphan, Part 4, Cathay Hotel, Shanghai, 20th of September, 1937. 1937. 20th September, Cathay Hotel, Shanghai, Part 4 of When We Were Orphan by Kazuo Ishiguro. Here we go. Travelers in the Arab countries. Chapter 12. Let's see what copy. Chapter 12, Part 4. Travelers in the Arab countries have often remarked on the way a native will position his face disconcertingly close during conversation. This, of course, is simply a local custom that happens to differ from our own, and any open-minded visitor will before long come to think nothing of it. It has occurred to me that I should try and view in a similar spirit something which over these three weeks I have been here in Shanghai has come to a perennial source of irritation, namely the way people here seem to determine at every opportunity to block one's view. No sooner has one entered a room or stepped out from a car that someone or other will have smilingly placed himself right within one's line of vision, preventing the most basic perusal of one's surrounding. Often as not, the offending person is one's very host and guide of that moment. But should there be a lapse in this quarter, there is never a shortage of bystanders eager to make good of the shortcoming. As far as I can ascertain, all the nationals group that make up the community here, English, Chinese, French, American, Japanese, Russian, subscribe to this practice with equal zeal and inescapable conclusion to this practice with equal. Oh my god, wait. I'm not looking at the text properly. Okay, hang on. My eyes. Hang on. My eyes are darting everywhere. Often as not, the offending person is one's very host or guide of that moment, but should there be any lapse in this quarter, there is never a shortage of bystanders eager to make good the shortcoming. As far as I'm assertion. Why do you have to write it so complicated? As far as I can ascertain. assertion, all the national groups that make up the community here English, Chinese, French, American, Japanese, Russian subscribe to this practice with equal zeal, and the inescapable conclusion is that this custom is one that has grown up uniquely here within Shanghai's international settlement, cutting across all barriers of races and class. It took me a good few days to put my finger on this local eccentricity and to appreciate that it was what lay at the root of the disorientation which threatened to overwhelm me for a time upon first arriving here. Now, although I still find myself occasionally annoyed by it, it is not a thing of undue concern. Besides, I have discovered a second complementary Shanghai practice to make life a little easier. It appears to be quite permissible here to employ surprisingly rough shoves to get people out of the way, though I have not yet found the nerve to take advantage of this license myself. I have already witnessed a number of occasions refined ladies at society gatherings giving the most per- peremptory pushes without provoking as much as a murmur. When on my second night here I entered the ballroom on the penthouse floor of the Palace Hotel, I had yet to identify either of these curious practices, and consequently found much of that evening undermined by my frustration with what I then took to be the inordinately crowded nature of the international settlement. Stepping out of the lift, I had barely glimpsed the plush carpet leading into the ballroom, a row of Chinese men lined all along it, when one of my hosts for the evening, Mr. MacDonald from the British Consulate, put his broad frame before me. As we strode towards the doorway, I noticed the rather charming way each doorman as we passed would bow and bring his white gloved hands up together. But we were hardly past the third man. There were probably 6 or 7 in all, when even this view was obstructed by my other host, a certain Mr. Grayson, representing the Shanghai Municipal Council, who stepped up beside me to continue whatever he had been saying during our ascent in the lift. But and I had no sooner entered the room in which, according to my two hosts, we were to witness the city's smartest cabaret and gathering of the Shanghai's elite. Then I found myself in the midst of a drifting crowd. The tall ceilings above me, with the elaborate chandeliers, led me to suppose the dimensions of the room were pretty vast, though for some time I had no way to corroborate this. As I followed my host through the throng, I saw large windows all along one side of the room, through which at the moment the sunset was streaming in. I glimpsed too a stage at the far end, upon which several musicians in white tuxedos were wandering about talking. They, like everyone else, appeared to be waiting for something, perhaps simply for the night to fall. In general, there was a restlessness, with people pushing and circling one another to no clear purpose. I almost lost my sight at my I almost lost sight of my host, but then saw MacDonald beckoning to me, and I eventually found myself sitting down at a small table and with a starchy white cover, to which my companions had pushed their way. From this lower vantage point, I could see that, in fact, a large expanse of the floor had been left vacant, presumably for the cabaret, and that almost all present had squeezed themselves into a relatively narrow strip along the glazed side of the room. The table were sitting at the part of a long row, though when I tried to see how far the row extended, I was once again thwarted. No one was sitting at the tables immediately neighboring ours, probably because the jostling crowd made it impractical to do so. Indeed, before long, our table came to feel like a tiny boat assailed on all sides by tides of Chinese high society. My arrival, moreover, had not gone unnoticed. I could hear murmurs spreading around me, conveying the news, and more or less gazes turned our way. In spite of all this, until things grew quite impossible, I recall trying to continue this conversation I had started with my host in the car, bringing us to the Palace Hotel. At one point, I remember I was saying to MacDonald, "I very much appreciate your suggestion, sir, but in truth, I'm happy to pursue my lines of inquiry alone. It's how I accustomed to working." "As you will, old fellow," MacDonald said. "Just thought I'd mention it. Some of these fellows I'm talking of, they certainly know the way around this city. And the best of them just as good as anything you'll find at Scotland Yard. Just thought they might save you, all of us, some valuable time." "But you recall me telling you, Mr. MacDonald, I left England only once only once I have formed a clear view of this case. In other words, my arrival here isn't a starting point, but a culmination of many years of work." In other words, Grayson suddenly put in, "you have come here to us in order to tie up the case once and for all. How marvelous! It's wonderful news." One second, please. I need coffee. Sorry. MacDonald gave the municipal council man a disdainful glance, and then continued, as though the latter had not spoken. "I don't mean to cast any doubt upon your abilities, old fellow. Your record speaks for itself, after all. I was only suggesting a little backup in the way of personnel. Strictly under your command, naturally. Just, to quicken things up. Having only just got here, it might not be so clear how urgent our situations become. It all looks pretty relaxed here, I know, but I rather fear we don't have a great deal of time left." "I fully appreciate the urgency, Mr. MacDonald, but I can only say again, I have every reason to believe things will be brought to a satisfactory conclusion in a relatively short time, provided, that is, I am allowed to go on about my inquiries unhindered." "That's splendid news!" Grayson exclaimed, earning another cold look from MacDonald. For much of the time I had been in his company that day, I had been growing increasingly impatient with MacDonald's pretense at being nothing more than a consulate official charged with protocol matters. It was not just his inordinate curiosity concerning my plans or his eagerness to foist assistance on me that gave him away. It was the air of refined duplicity he carried along with his languid, well-bred manners that marked him out so readily as a senior intelligence man. But by that point, by that point in that evening, I must have grown rather weary of humoring him in his charade, for I put my request to him as though the truth had been acknowledged between us long before. "Since we are on the questions of assistance, Mr. MacDonald," I said to him, "there is in fact something you might be able to do for me that would be of immense help." "Try me, old fellow." "As I've mentioned before, I have a particular interest in what I believe the police forces here are calling the yellow snake killings." "Oh, yes?" I could see a guardedness falling over MacDonald's face. Grayson, on the other hand, seemed not to know what I was referring to, and looked from one to the other of us. "In fact," I went on, looking carefully at MacDonald's, "it was when I gathered sufficient evidence on these so-called yellow snake killings that I made the decision finally to come here." "I see. So you are interested in the yellow snake business?" MacDonald glanced about the room nonchalantly. "Nasty affair. but not all that significant. I wouldn't have thought in terms of the larger picture. On the contrary, I believe it to be highly relevant. I'm so sorry, Grayson managed finally to put in. But just what are these yellow snake killings? I've never heard of them. It's what people are calling these communist reprisals, McDonald's told him. Reds murdering relatives of their number who turned informer on them. Then he said to me, we get these happenings from time to time, and the Reds are savages in such matters. But it's a matter between the Chinese, Chiang Kai-sheks, well on top of the Reds and plan to stay that way. Japanese or no Japanese, we try to keep above it, you know. Surprised you're so interested in all that, old fellow. But this particular set of reprisals, I said, these yellow snake killings, they have been continuing for a long time. Off and on for the last 4 years, during which time 13 people have to date been murdered. You know the details better than me, old fellow, but from what I've heard, the reasons the reprisals are protected is that the Reds don't know who their traitor is. They began to slaughter the wrong people, a little approximate, you see. The Bolshevik vision of this justice. Every time they change their ideas about who this yellow snake chap might be, they go out and slaughter another family. It would help things greatly, Mr. McDonald's, if I were able to speak to this informer. The man referred to as the yellow snake. McDonald shrugged. That's all between the Chinese, old fellow. Oh, none of us even know why this who this yellow snake is. In my view, the Chinese government would do well to announce his identity before more innocent people get mistaken for his relatives. But honestly, old fellow, it's all between the Chinese. Best leave it that way. It is important that I get to speak to the informer. Well, since you feel so strongly about it, I have a word with a few people, but I can't promise much. This chap seems pretty useful to the government. Chiang's men keep him pretty well under wraps, I had imagined. Sorry, my throat is not in the best condition today. What can I do? I have become aware by this point of ever more people pressing in on all sides, eager not just to glimpse me in the flesh, but to overhear something of our conversation. In such circumstances, I could hardly expect MacDonald to talk frankly, and I decided I should abandon the matter for a time being. In fact, I was overcome at that moment by a strong urge to rise and get a little air. Oh yeah. Just 1 second. I forgot about something. Give me 1 second, please. Sorry. Sorry. Okay. I have become aware by this point of ever more people pressing in on all sides, eager not just to glimpse me in the flesh, but to overhear something of our conversation. In such circumstances, I could hardly expect Mr. MacDonald to talk frankly, and I decided that I should abandon the matter for the time being. In fact, I was overcome at the moment by a strong urge to rise and get a little air, but before I could move, Grayson had leaned forward with a cheerful smile, saying, "Mr. Banks, I appreciate this might not be the best time, but I wanted to just have a quick word. You see, I've been charged with the happy task of organizing the ceremony. That is to say, the welcoming ceremony. Mr. Grayson, I don't wish to seem ungrateful, but as Mr. MacDonald here just put it, time is rather pressing, and I feel I have been welcome enough already with so much lavish hospitality." "No, no, sir," Grayson laughed nervously. "I was referring to the welcoming ceremony. I mean, the one welcoming back your parents after their years of captivity. This, I admit, rather took me by surprise, and perhaps for a second I just stared at him. He let out another nervous laugh and said, "Of course, it's something jumping ahead, I realize. You are first you are first to do your work, and of course I don't wish to tempt fate. All the same, you see, we are obliged to prepare. As soon as you announce the solving of the case, everyone will look to us, the municipal council, to provide an occasion worthy of such moment. They'll want a pretty special event, and they'll want it promptly. But you see, sir, to organize something on the scale we are talking of, it's no simple matter. So you see, I wondered if I could just put a few very basic options before you. My first question, sir, before anything else, is if you are happy with the choice of Jesville Park for the ceremony. We will, you see, require substantial space." While Grayson had been speaking, I had become steadily aware of the sound from somewhere behind the hubbub of the crowd of distant gunfire. But now, Grayson's words were suddenly cut off by a loud boom which shook the room. I looked up in alarm, only to see the people around me smiling, even laughing, their cocktail glasses still in their hands. After a moment, I could discern a movement in the crowd towards the window, rather as though a cricket match had resumed outside. I decided to seize the opportunity to leave the table and, rising, join the drift. There were too many people in front of me to see anything, and I was trying to edge my way forward when I became aware that a great-haired lady by my shoulder was talking to me. "Mr. Banks," she was saying, "do you have any idea at all how relieved we feel now that you are finally here with us? Of course, we didn't like to show it, but we are getting extremely concerned about, well," she gestured towards the sound of the gunfire. "My husband, he insists the Japanese will never dare attack the international settlement, but then he says it at least 20 times a day, and it's hardly reassuring. I tell you, Mr. Banks, when news of your impending arrival reached us, that was the first good news we had here in months. My husband even stopped repeating that little mantra of his about the Japanese. Stopped for at least a few days. Good heavens!" Another thunderous explosion had rocked the room, provoking a few ironic cheers. I then noticed a little way in front of me some French windows had been opened, and people had pushed out onto the balcony. "Don't worry, Mr. Banks," a young man said, grasping my elbow. "There's no chance of any of that coming over here. Both sides are extremely careful now after the Bloody Monday." "But where is it coming from?" I asked him. "Oh, It's a Jap warship in the harbor. The shells actually arc over us and land over there across the creek. After dark, it's quite a sight. Rather like watching shooting stars. And what if a shell falls short? Not only the young man I was talking to, but several others around me laughed at this idea. I thought rather too loudly. Then another voice said, "Well, we'll just have to trust the Japs to get it right. After all, if they get sloppy, they're just as likely to drop one behind their own lines." "Mr. Banks, would you care for these?" Someone was holding out a pair of opera glasses. When I took hold of them, it was as if I had been given a signal. The crowd parted before me, and I found myself virtually conveyed towards the open French windows. I stepped outside onto the small balcony. I could feel a warm breeze, and the sky was deep pink. I was looking down from a considerable height, and the canal was visible past the next row of buildings. Beyond the water was a mass of shacks and rubble, out of which a column of grey smoke was rising into the evening sky. I put the glasses to my eyes, but the focus was entirely wrong for me, and I could see nothing. When I fiddled with the wheel, I found myself gazing at the canal, where I was faintly surmised to see various boats still going about their normal business right next to the fighting. I picked out one particular boat, a barge-like vessel with a lone oarsman, that was so piled up with crates and bundles it seemed impossible for it to pass under the low canal bridge just beneath me. As I watched, the vessel approached the bridge rapidly, and I was sure I would see at least a crate or two fall from the top of the pile into the water. For the next few seconds, I went on staring through the glasses at the boat, having quite forgotten the fighting. I noted with the interest of the boatman, who, like me, was utterly absorbed by the fate of his cargo, oblivious of the war, not 60 yards to his right. Then the boat has vanished under the bridge, and when I saw it glide gracefully out on the other side, the precarious bundle still intact, I lowered the glasses with a sigh. I realized a large crowd had been gathering at my back while I had been looking onto the canal. I handed the glasses to someone nearby and said to no one in particular, "So that's the war. Most interesting. Are there many casualties, do you suppose?" This set off a lot of talking. A voice said, "Plenty of death over there, Chappé. But the Japs will have it in a few more days and it will go quiet again." "Wouldn't be so sure," someone else said. "The Kuomintang surprised everyone so far, and my bet is that they'll keep doing so. I had bet on them holding out a good while yet." Then everyone around me seems to start arguing once more. A few days, a few weeks, what's the difference it makes? The Chinese would have to surrender sooner or later, so why did they not do so now? To which several voices objected that the conclusion was not nearly so cut and dried. Things are changing by the day, and there were many factors, each impinging on the others. "And besides," someone asked loudly, "hasn't Mr. Banks turned up?" This question, obviously intended to be rhetorical, nevertheless hung oddly in the air, causing a hush to fall and all eyes turns to me once more. In fact, I got the idea that it was not only the immediate group around the balcony, but the entire ballroom that had fallen into silence and awaiting my response. It struck me that this was a good time as any to make an announcement, one that perhaps had been called for from the moment I had entered the room, and clearing my throat, I declared loudly, "Ladies and gentlemen, I can well see the situation here has grown rather trying, and I have no wish to raise false expectations at such time. But let me say that I would not be here now if I were not optimistic about my chances of bringing this case in the very near future to a happy conclusion. In fact, ladies and gentlemen, I would say I am more than optimistic. I beg then for your patience over this coming week or so, after that as well. Let us see what we have achieved. As I uttered these last words, the jazz orchestra suddenly started up within the room. I have no idea if this was simply a coincidence, but in any case, the effect was to round off my statement rather nicely. I felt the focus of the room shifting away from me and saw people starting to return inside. I too made my way into the room, and as I tried to find our table again, I had for a moment lost my bearings somewhat and noticed that a troop of dancing girls had taken the floor. One moment, please. My throat is very dry. Okay. There were perhaps as many as 20 dancers, many of them Eurasians, dressed skimpily to match outfits with a bird motif. As the dancers proceeded with their floor show, the room seemed to lose all interest in the battle across the water, though the noises were still clearly audible behind the cheery music. It was as though for these people, one entertainment had finished and another had begun. I felt, not for the first time since arriving in Shanghai, a wave of revulsion towards them. It was not simply the fact that they are having failed to dismally before over the years to rise to the challenge of the case, of their having allowed matters to slip to the present appalling level with all its huge ramifications. What had quietly shocked me from the moment of my arrival is the refusal of everyone here to acknowledge their drastic culpability. During this fortnight I have been here, throughout all my dealings with all these citizens have been have been all these citizens, high or low, I have not witnessed once anything that could pass for an honest shame. Here, in other words, at the heart of the maelstrom threatening to suck in the whole of the civilized world, is a pathetic conspiracy of denial, a denial of responsibility which has turned in on itself and gone sour, manifesting itself in the sort of pompous defensiveness I have encountered so often. And here they are now, the so-called elite of Shanghai, treating with such contempt the sufferings of the Chinese neighbors across the canal. I was moving along the line of the bags that had formed to watch the cabaret, trying to contain my sense of disgust, when I realized someone was tugging on my arm and turned out to find Sarah Hemmings. "Christopher," she said, "I've been trying to get over to you all evening. Have you no time to say hello to your old friends from home? Look, Cecile's over there. He's waving to you." It took me a little while to get a view of Sir Cecile through the crowd. He was seated alone at the table in the far corner of the room, and indeed was waving to me. I waved back, and then I looked at Sarah. It was our first encounter since my arrival. The impression I received of her that evening was that she seemed very well. The Shanghai sun had removed her customary pallor to some advantage. Moreover, as we exchanged a few friendly words, her manner remained light-hearted and assured. It is only now, after the events of last night, that I find myself thinking over again that first encounter in an attempt to discover how I could have been so deceived. Perhaps it is only hindsight that makes me recall something overly deliberate in her smile, particularly whenever she mentions her still. And although we exchanged little more than pleasantries after that night, one phrase she uttered that evening, which even at the time rather puzzled me, has continued to return to me all day. I had been inquiring how she and Sir Cecil had continued the year they had spent here. She had been reassured. She had been assuring me that although Sir Cecil had not achieved the breakthrough he had hoped for, he had nonetheless done much to earn the gratitude of the community. It was then that I asked, with nothing much in mind, "So you have no immediate plans to leave Shanghai?" At which Sarah had laughed, cast another gaze at Sir Cecil's corner, and said, "No, we are quite settled now. The metropole is very comfortable. I don't expect we'll be going anywhere in a hurry. Not unless someone comes through to the rescue, that is." She had said all this, including the last remark about being rescued, as though telling a joke, and although I did not know exactly what she meant, I had responded with a small laugh to go with hers. We had then, as far as I can recall, talked about mutual friends in England, and until Grayson's arrival effectively did put an end to a seemingly uncomplicated conversation. It is only now, as I say, after last night, that I find myself searching back through my various encounters with Sarah over these 3 weeks. It is this one phrase, added as a kind of afterthought to her breezy reply, to which I continue to return. That's the end of chapter 12. Reading with a strap still candy in your mouth is not easy at all. But I certainly feel better now. Good morning, Taza! Oh my god, those emoji are awesome! Whoa! Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you for being here, Taza. Should go on some cafes sometimes. Yay! It's been a long time I saw you live, so here. Yeah. I've been doing well. I think I'm kind of like on a very good weekly schedule right now. So I'll be here live every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, and occasionally I'll do evening streams as well for raiding content or other games content. But yeah, thank you so much for dropping by. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Shall we continue? Chapter 13. It's a long book. I can't give a schedule as well. My schedule has been really dog shit for the past 6 months or so. I'm really trying my best to do the schedule, and I still wake up late this morning. Like I couldn't wake up properly. I really need a proper schedule, and then and a proper gym schedule. I need a proper schedule for everything in my life. Otherwise, I'm going downhill, health wise, mental health wise. So I'm trying my best. I really am. It's difficult, but yeah, it's I like reading, and I really hope that people are enjoying my readings session. I really hope that this is useful for some people in this world. Mm. Yes, I'm gonna continue now on chapter 13. We are currently reading Kazuo Ishiguro's When We Were Orphan, part 4, chapter 13. The character is currently in Shanghai. Chapter 13. I spent most of the afternoon and yesterday inside the dark, creaking boathouse where the three bodies had been discovered. The police respected my wish to carry out my investigations undisturbed, to the extent that I lost all track of time and hardly noticed the sun setting outside. By the time I crossed the Bund and strode down Nanking Road, the bright lights had come on and pavements were filled with the evening crowds. After the long, dispiriting day, I felt the need to unwind a little and made my way to the corner of Nanking and Kiangsi Road, to a small club I had been taken to in the days soon after my arrival. There is nothing so special about the place. It is just a quiet basement where most nights a lone French pianist will give melancholy renditions of Bizet or Gershwin. But it meets my needs well enough that I have returned there several times over these weeks. Last night, I spent perhaps an hour at the corner table, eating a little French food and making notes on what I had discovered in the boathouse, while the taxi dancers swayed with their clients to the music. I had climbed the stairs back up to the street intending to return to the hotel when I happened to fall into conversation with a Russian doorman. He is some sort of count and speaks excellent English, learned, he tells me, from his governess before the revolution. I have got into the habit of passing a few words with him whenever I visit the club, and was doing so again last night when I no longer remember what we were discussing. He happened to mention Sir Cecil and Lady Mathers had passed by earlier in the evening. I suppose, I remarked, they were off home for the night. At this, the Count thought for a moment, then said, "Well, Lucky Chan's house. Yes, I believe Sir Cecil mentioned they were on their way there. It was not an establishment I knew, but the Count proceeded without prompting to give me directions. Since it was not far, I set off towards it. His instructions were clear enough, but I am still uncertain of my way around these side streets of Nanking Road, and managed to get a little lost. This was not something I minded so much. The atmosphere in that part of the city is not intimidating, even after dark, and although I was accosted by the odd beggar, and at one point a drunken sailor collided with me, I found myself drifting with the nighttime crowd in a mood not far from tranquility. After the depressing work in the boathouse, it was a relief to be amidst these pleasure seekers of every race and class, to have the smell of flute and incense come wafting towards me as I passed each brightly lit doorway. Last night, too, as I have come increasingly to do of late, I believe I looked about me, scanning the faces in the passing crowd, hoping to spot Akira. For the fact is, I had almost certainly seen my old friend shortly after my arrival in Shanghai, only my second or third night here. It was the night Mr. Cashwick of Jardin Matheson and some other prominent citizens had decided I should taste the nightlife. I was still at the stage in something of a disoriented condition, and was finding the tour of dance bars and clubs tiresome. We were in the entertainment area of the French concession. I can see now my hosts were rather enjoying shocking me with some of the more lurid establishment, and we were just emerging from a club when I had just seen his face go by in a crowd. He was one of a group of Japanese men dressed in sharp suits, evidently out of the town. Of course, a glimpse so fleetingly, the figures had been virtually silhouettes against a row of lanterns hanging in a doorway. I could not be completely sure it was Akira. Perhaps for this reason, perhaps for some other, I did nothing to attract the attention of my old friend. This might be hard to understand, but I can only say it was so. I suppose I was assuming then there would be many more such opportunities. Perhaps I felt that to meet in such a way by chance when we each had other companions was inappropriate, unworthy even of the reunion I had anticipated for so long. In any case, I had let the moment pass and had simply followed Mr. Cashwick and the others to the awaiting limousine. Over the past weeks, however, I have had much cause to regret my inaction that evening. Although even at the busiest times I have persisted in searching the crowd in streets or in hotel lobbies as I have gone about my business, I have yet to spot him again. I am aware I could take active steps to try and locate him, but really, the case must for now take priority. And Shanghai is not a vast place. We are sure to happen upon another sooner or later. But to return to the events of last night, the doorman's directions eventually brought me to a kind of square where a number of little streets intersect and crowds were thicker than ever. There were people trying to sell things, others trying to beg, while yet others were just standing about talking and watching. A lone rickshaw had that had ventured into the throng had become stuck in its midst, and as I passed, the rickshaw man was arguing furiously with a bystander. I could see the Lucky Chan's house at the far corner, and before long was being conducted up a narrow stairway covered in scarlet plush. I first entered a room the size of an average hotel room, where a dozen Chinese were crowded around a gaming table. When I encou- when I inquired if Sir Cecil was in the building, two of the staff conferred quickly, and then one of them signaled for me to follow. I was led up another flight of stairs, along a dim corridor, and then into a room filled with smoke, in which a group of Frenchmen were playing cards. When I shook my head, the man shrugged and beckoned me again. In this way, I soon established that the building was a gambling emporium with some size, comprising many smallish rooms, each with some game or other in progress. But I grew exasperated at the way my guide would nod knowingly each time I repeated Sarah or Sir Cecil's name, just to lead me into yet another smoky room where only the wary eyes of strangers would look up at me. In any case, the more I saw the establishment, the more unlikely it seemed Sir Cecil would bring Sarah into such a place, and I was on the point of giving up when I stepped through the door to find Sir Cecil sitting at a table staring at the roulette wheel. There were many as 20 people present, mostly men. The room was not so smoky as some others, but felt hotter. Sir Cecil was utterly absorbed and gave me only the most cursory of waves before fixing his eyes on the wheels. Placed around the periphery of the room were some worn armchairs covered in a reddish material. In some of these, an old Chinese man in a western suit, drenched in sweat, was snoring away. The only other chair occupied was in the shadowy corner furthest from the gaming table, where Sarah was resting her head on the heel of her hand, her eyes half closed. She gave me a start when I sat down beside her. "Oh, Christopher, what are you doing here?" Just passing by. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to startle you." "Just passing by? This place? I don't believe it. You have been pursuing us." We were speaking in a lowered tone so as not to distract the players at the table, but somewhere in the building I could hear faintly someone practicing a trumpet. "I have to confess," I said, "I did happen to hear you would come here, and since I was walking past—" "Oh, Christopher, you were lonely." "Hardly, but I've had a rather gloomy day, and I felt like unwinding a little, that's all. Though I must admit, I would have hesitated if I had known you were in such a place." "Don't be cruel. Cecile and I, we enjoy being low life. It's fun. It's all part of this It's all part of what Shanghai is about. Now tell me about your gloomy day. You look despondent. No breakthrough yet on your case, I suppose? No breakthrough, but I am not despondent. Things are starting to take shape. When I, when I then began to describe to her how I had spent over 2 hours on hand and knees in a rotting boat in which 3 decaying corpses had been found, she pulled a face and stopped me. It's all so ghastly. Someone was saying at the tennis club today the bodies had all had their arms and legs cut off. Is that true? I'm afraid so. She pulled another face. It's too ghastly for words. But these were Chinese factory workers, weren't they? Surely they can't have much to do with your parents. Actually, I believe this crime has a very significant bearing on my parents' case. Really? They were saying at the tennis club these murders were all part of the yellow rat business. They're saying they are saying the victims were the yellow rat's nearest and dearest. Yellow snake. Pardon? The communist informer, Yellow Snake. Oh yes. Well, anyway, it's so ghastly. What are the Chinese doing, tearing at each other's throat at a time like this? You would think the Reds and the government might put up a united front against the Japanese just for a little while at least. I suppose hatred between communists and nationalists runs pretty deep. Pretty deep. That's what Cecile says. Oh, look at him. How can he play like that? I followed her gaze and saw Sir Cecile, who had his back to us, slumped over to one side so that most of his weight was on the table. There seemed every possibility of his sliding off the chair altogether. Sarah looked at me a little awkwardly. Then rising, she went over to him, placed a hand on each of his shoulders, and spoke gently into his ears. Sir Cecile came awake and glanced about him. It is possible that at this point I took my gaze off them for a second, for I am not at all certain about what exactly happened next. I saw Sarah reel back as though she had been struck, and for a second she seemed about to lose her balance, then recovered. Sir Cecile, when I scrutinized his back, was sitting upright, concentrating on the game, and I could not say it was he who caused Sarah to tumble. She saw me staring at her, smiling, and came back and sat down beside me. He's tired, she said. He has so much energy, but at his age, he really needs to rest more. Do the two of you often come to this place? She nodded. And a few others very similar. Cecile doesn't much like those big glittering places. He doesn't think it's possible to come out a winner in those places. Do you always accompany him on these expeditions? Someone has to look after him. He's not a young man, you see. Oh, I don't mind it. It's rather exciting. It's what this city is all about, really. A collective sigh went around the gaming table and the players broke into conversation. I saw Sir Cecile attempt to rise, and then, only then, I realized how inebriated he was. He slumped back down on his chair, but on a second attempt I managed to rise and come unsteadily over towards us. I stood up, expecting to shake hands, but he rested his hands on my shoulder, as much for balance as anything else, saying, my dear boy, delighted to see you. Did you have any luck just now, sir? Luck? No. Tonight's been a foul night. Whole wretched week it had been bad. But you never know. I'll rise up again. Rise from the ashes. Sarah too was on her feet and put out a hand to support him, but he brushed her off without looking at her. And then he said to me, I say, care for a cocktail? There's a bar downstairs. That's very kind, sir, but I really should be getting back to my hotel. Another hot day tomorrow. Good to see you working hard. Of course, I came out here to this city wanting to sort things a little myself, but you see, he bent his face right down to me until it was only an inch or two away. Too deep for me, my boy. Too deep by far. Cecile, darling, let's go home. Home? You got this rat hole of a hotel at home? You have an advantage on me, my dear, being the vagabond that you are. That's why you don't mind it. Let's go, darling. I'm tired. You're tired. My little vagabond's tired. Banks, do you have a car outside? I'm afraid not. But if you like, I'll try to and find a taxi. A taxi? Think you are in Piccadilly? Suppose you can hail a cab out there? Just soon cut your throat, this Chinaman. Cecile, darling, please sit down here while Christopher finds Boris. Then she said to me, our driver could be somewhere not far. Would you mind terribly? Poor Cecile's a little the worse for wear tonight. Doing my best to look good-humored, I made my way outside the building, making a mental note of how to return to the room. The square outside was as dense as ever with people, but a little further on I could see a street in which rickshaws and motor cars were waiting in rows. I made my way over, and after a while going from car to car uttering Sir Cecile's name of chauffeurs of varying nationalities, I eventually got a response. When I returned to the gambling house, Sarah and Sir Cecile were already outside. She was supporting him with both her hands, but his tall, bent form looked likely to overwhelm her at any second. As I came hurrying up, I could hear him saying, "It's you they don't like in there, my dear. When I used to frequent this place by myself, they always treated me like royalty. Oh, yes, like royalty. Don't like women of your sort. They only want real ladies or else whores. And you are neither. So you see, they don't like you one bit. Never had any trouble here until you insisted on tagging along." "Come along, darling. Here's Christopher." "Well done, Christopher. Look, darling, he's found Boris for us." It was not a great distance to the metropole, but the car could often move at no more than a crawl through the pedestrians and rickshaws. Through the journey, Sarah continued to hold Sir Cecile by the arm and shoulder while he drifted in and out of sleep. Whenever he came around, he would try to shake Sarah off, but she would laugh and continue to hold him steady and in the lurching vehicle. It was my turn to assist him as we negotiated the revolving doors of the metropole, and then in the lift, while Sarah exchanged cheerful greetings with the lobby staff. Then we were finally in the mater's suite, and I was able to lower Sir Cecile into an armchair. I thought he would doze off, but instead he grew suddenly alert again and began asking me some meaningless questions of which I could make neither head nor tail. Then Sarah emerged from the from the bathroom with the flannel and began to mop his forehead. He said to me, "Banks, my boy, you can speak frankly. This wench here, you see, she's a good few years younger than me. No spring chicken self, mind you. But still, a good few years my junior. Tell me frankly, my boy, do you suppose in a place like tonight, where you found us tonight, a place like that, do you suppose a stranger looking at the two of us together? Well, let's speak frankly. What I'm asking you is, do you suppose people take my wife for a harlot?" Sarah's expression, as far as I could see it, did not change, though a slight urgency entered her ministrations as though she hoped the treatment would bring a change of mood. Sir Cecile waved his head in irritation as though avoiding a fly, and then said, "Come on, my boy, do speak frankly now." Now, darling," Sarah said quietly. "You're being unpleasant." "I'll tell you a secret, my boy. I'll tell you a secret. I rather enjoy it. I like people to mistake my wife for a harlot. That's why I like to frequent places like that one night." "Get off me! Leave me alone!" He pushed Sarah aside and then continued. "At the reasons I go, of course, no doubt you guessed it, I owe a little money. Run up a bit of a debt, you know. Nothing I won't win back, of course." "Darling, Christopher has been very kind. You mustn't bore him. What's the harlot saying? Hear what she say, my boy? Well, don't. Don't listen to her. Don't listen to trollops, that's what I say. They'll lead you astray. Particularly in times of war and conflict, never listen to a trollop in the times of war. He climbed up to his feet unaided, and for a moment stood swaying before us in the middle of the room. He unfastened his unfastened collar sticking out from his neck, and then he moved off into the bedroom, closing the door behind him. Sarah gave me a smile and then went in after him. Had it not been for that smile, or rather something like an appeal I detected behind it, I would certainly have withdrawn at that point. As it was, I remained in the room examining absent-mindedly a Chinese bowl on a stand near the entrance. For a time I could hear Sir Cecil shouting something, and then there was silence. Sarah emerged up after perhaps 5 minutes and looked surprised to find me still there. Is he alright? I asked. He's asleep now. He'll be fine. I'm sorry you were inconvenienced, Christopher. Hardly what you were seeking when you came looking for us this evening. We'll arrange something to make up. We'll take you out for dinner somewhere. Astor House has good food still. She was guiding me out of the room, but I turned at the door and said, This sort of thing, does it happen a lot? She gave a sigh. Often enough. But you mustn't think I mind. It's just that I worry sometimes about his heart, you know. That's why I always go with him now. You look after him well. You must not get the wrong impression. Cecile's a dear man. Good morning, Jean. It's okay, I woke up late too. Cecile's a dear man. We must take you out to dinner very soon, when you're not busy. But I suppose you are always busy. Is this how Sir Cecil tends to pass all his evenings? Most of them. Some of his days too. Is there anything that I can do at all? Anything you can do? She gave a slight laugh. Look, Christopher, I'm fine. Really, you must not get the wrong impression about Cecil. He's a dear. I do love him so. Well then, I'll say good night. She took another step towards me and raised a hand vaguely. I found myself grasping it, but not quite knowing what to do next. Kissed the back of it, then mumbling another good night, I stepped into the corridor. You're not to worry about me, Christopher, she whispered from the door. I'm perfectly all right. Those were her words to me last night, but today it is those earlier words of hers, uttered 3 weeks ago when I first saw her at the ballroom of the Palace Hotel, that returned to me with particular pertinence. I don't expect we'll be going anywhere in a hurry, she had said, unless someone comes to the rescue. What could she have intended by making such a remark to me that evening? As I say, even at the time it puzzled me, and I may well have quizzed her further about it, had not Grayson, just at that moment, emerged out of the crowd looking for me. Yeah, go make coffee and Noodible. Time. Yep. Speaking of which, I do need another cup of coffee and I'll be right back. Just one moment, please. Give me 1 second, I'll be right back with more coffee. Apologies, I am now back. Sorry. Well, it's I oh oh, oh wow, going here. Alrighty, let us continue reading. Right. So that was the end of part 4, chapter 12. Sorry, chapter 13. Sorry. We are now going to start part 5. Okay. Good morning. Good afternoon to those who just came in and joined us today. We are currently, as the title says, we are currently reading When We Were Orphans by Kazuo Ishiguro. We are currently on part 5, chapter 14. Part 5, Cathay Hotel, Shanghai, 29th of September 1937. Part 5, Cathay Hotel, Shanghai, 29th September 1937. Chapter 14. I mishandled my meeting this morning with MacDonald at the British consulate, and recalling it tonight only fills me with frustration. The fact is that he had prepared himself well and I had not. Time and again I allowed him to lead me down false avenues, to waste my energy arguing over things he had decided to concede to me from the start. If anything, I was further forward with him 4 weeks ago. That evening, at the ballroom of the Palace Hotel, when I first put to him this notion of an interview with the Yellow Snake, I had caught MacDonald unawares then, and had at least got to him to admit in so many words his true role here in Shanghai. This morning, however, I had not obliged him even to relinquish his charade of being simply an official charged with protocol matters. I suppose I underestimated him. I had thought that it's simply a matter of going in and reprimanding him for his slow progress in arranging what I had requested. Only now do I see how he laid his traps, realizing that once I became annoyed, he would simply get the better of me. It was foolish to show my irritation in the way I did, but these continuous days of intense work have left me tired. And of course, there was the unexpected encounter with Grayson, the municipal councilman, as I was going up to MacDonald's office. In fact, I would say, it was this more than anything else which threw me off my balance this morning, to the extent that for much of my subsequent discussion with MacDonald, my mind was actually elsewhere. I had been kept waiting for several minutes in the little lounge on the second floor of the consulate building. The secretary finally came to inform me that MacDonald was ready, and I had crossed the marble landing and was standing before the lift doors when Grayson came hurrying down the staircase, calling to me. "Good morning, Mr. Banks. I'm so sorry. Perhaps this isn't the best time." "Good morning, Mr. Grayson. As a matter of fact, it isn't ideal. I was just on my way up to see our friend, Mr. MacDonald." "Oh, well, I won't keep you. It's just that here I was in the building and I heard you were here too." His cheerful laugh echoed around the walls. "It's splendid to see you again, Mr. Grayson. But just now, I won't keep you for a second, sir. But if I may, you see, you've been a little difficult to track down lately." "Well, Mr. Grayson, if it can be dealt with very briefly." "Oh, very briefly. You see, sir, I realize this may seem like jumping ahead, but a certain amount of forward planning is required in these matters. If things aren't up to scratch at such important event, if things look even a little shoddy or amateurish." "Mr. Grayson, I am so sorry. I just wish to have your thoughts on a few details concerning the welcome reception. We have now settled on the Jesville Park as the venue. We shall erect a marquee with a stage and public address system. I'm so sorry. I'll come to the point, Mr. Banks. I really wish to discuss with you your own role in the proceedings. Our feeling is that the ceremony should be kept simple. What I had in mind was perhaps you would say a few words concerning how you went about case, solving the case, which vital clues finally led you to your parents, that sort of thing. Just a few words. The crowd would be so delighted. And then at the end of your speech, I thought they might to come out on the stage. They, Mr. Grayson, your parents, sir. My idea is that they might come on to the platform, wave, acknowledge to the others, then withdraw. But of course, this is no more than just an idea. I'm sure you have other excellent suggestions. No, Mr. Grayson. I suddenly felt a great weariness coming over me. It all sounds splendid. Now, if that's all, I really must. It's just one other thing, sir. A small matter, but one that might lend a most effective touch if pulled off just so. My idea was that at the moment your parents come out on the platform, the brass would strike up, perhaps something like Land of Hope and Glory. Some of my colleagues are less keen on the idea, but to my mind, Mr. Grayson, your idea sounds a marvelous one. What's more, I'm exceedingly flattered by your utter confidence in my ability to solve this case. But now, please, I'm keeping Mr. MacDonald waiting. Of course. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me. I pressed the button for the lift, and while I stood waiting, Grayson continued to hover. I actually have turned away from him to face the doors when I heard him say, "The only thing that I wondered about, Mr. Banks, have you any idea where your parents will be staying on the day of the ceremony? You see, we shall need to ensure they are conveyed to and from the park with minimum bother from the crowds." I cannot remember what I said to him in reply. Perhaps the lift doors opened at the moment and I was able to take my leave with him with nothing more than a cursory response. But it was this last question which hung in my mind throughout my meeting with Mr. McDonald's, and which, as I say, probably did more than anything else to prevent me thinking clearly about this matter in hand. And tonight again, now that the demands of the day are behind me, I find this same question returning to my mind. It is not that I have given no thought at all to the matter of where my parents should eventually be accommodated. It is just that it has always seemed to me premature, perhaps even tempting fate, to contemplate such questions with the great complexity of the case have still to be unraveled. I suppose the only occasion over the past weeks I gave the matter any real thought was on that evening I met up with my old school friend, Anthony Morgan. It was not long after my arrival here, my third or fourth night. I had known for some time that Morgan was living in Shanghai, but since we have never been especially friendly at St. Dunstan's, despite our being in the same class throughout, I had made no special arrangement to meet him. Sorry. Cat hair in my glasses. Amazing. Okay. But I received from him a telephone call on the morning of the third day. I could tell he was rather hurt at my failure to get in touch, and eventually I found myself agreeing to a rendezvous that evening in a hotel in the French Concession. It was well after dark when I found him waiting in a dimly lit hotel lounge. I had not laid eyes on him since school and was shocked by how worn and heavy-set he had become. But I tried to keep any such impression out of my voice as we exchanged warm greetings. "Funny," he said, patting me on the back. "Doesn't seem so long ago, and yet in some way it feels like another age." "It certainly does," I said. "Do you know," he went on, "I got a letter the other day from Emmerich the Dane. Remember him? Emmerich the Dane. Hadn't heard from him in years. living in Vienna now, it seems. Old Emmerich, you remember him? Yes, of course, I said, though I could summon only the vaguest memory of such a boy. Good old Emmerich. For the next hour or half hour or so, Morgan chatted on with hardly a break. He had come out to Hong Kong straight after Oxford, then moved to Shanghai 11 years ago after securing a position at the Jardine Matheson. Then, at one point, he broke off his story to say, "You wouldn't believe the god awful trouble I've been having with chauffeurs since all this trouble started. Regularly one got killed the first day the Japs had started shelling. Found another one, turned out to be a bandit of some sort. Kept having to rush off to perform his gang duties. Could never be found when you wanted to go somewhere. Picked me up once at the American Club with blood all over his shirt. Not his own, I soon gathered. Didn't say a word of in apology. Typical Chinaman. That was the last straw for me. Then I had two others, couldn't drive at all. One actually hit a rickshaw-man, hurt the poor fellow quite badly. The driver I've got now, not much better, so let's keep our fingers crossed he gets us there all right." I had no idea what he meant by his last statement, since as far as I could recall we had not agreed to go anywhere else that night. But I did not feel like picking up on it, and then he had quickly moved on to telling me about the shortages afflicting the hotel. The lounge we were sitting in, he confided, was not at all so dimly lit. The war had stopped the supply of light bulbs from the Sharpay factories. In some other parts of the hotel, guests were having to wander about through the darkness. He pointed out also that at least three members of the dance band at the far end of the room were not playing their instruments. That's because they were really porters. The real musician had either fled Shanghai or had been killed in the fighting. Still, they do a fair impersonation, don't you think? Now that he had pointed out, I saw that their impersonation were in fact poor in the extreme. One man looked utterly bored and was hardly bothering to hold his violin bow near his instrument. Another was standing with a clarinet virtually forgotten in his hand, staring open-mouthed wonder at the real musician playing around him. It was only when I congratulated Morgan on his intimate knowledge at the hotel that he told me he had in fact been living there for over a month, having judged his apartment in Hongqiu too close for comfort to the fighting. When I muttered some words of sympathy that he had to abandon his home, his mood suddenly changed, and for the first time I saw about him a melancholy that brought to mind the unhappy and lonely boy I had known at school. It wasn't much of a home anyway, he said, looking into the cocktail. Just me, a few servants that came and went. Miserable little place, really. In some ways, it was just an excuse. The fighting gave me a good reason to walk out. It was a miserable little place. All my furnitures were Chinese. Couldn't sit comfortably anywhere. Had a songbird once, but it died. It's better for me here. Much quicker to my watering hose. Then he looked up at his watch and drained his glass and said, "Well, better not keep them waiting. Car's outside." There's something about Morgan's manner, kind of nonchalant urgency that made it hard to raise any objections. Besides, these were still my early days in the city, when I was in the habit of being taken from function to function by various hosts. I thus followed Morgan out of the building. "Welcome, Kitsune. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Welcome to our reading session. Please take a seat." Besides, I thus followed Morgan out of the building, and before long I was sitting with him in the back of his car, moving through the lively nighttime streets of the French Concession. Almost immediately, the driver only just avoided an oncoming tram, and I thought this would start Morgan off again on his chauffeur problems. But now he had fallen into introspective mood, staring silently out of his window at the passing neon and Chinese banners. At some point, when I remarked to him in an attempt to glean something about the event to which we were going, "Do we suppose we'll be late?" He glanced at his watch again and replied distractedly, "They've been waiting for you all this long. They won't mind a few more minutes." Then he added, "This must feel so odd for you." For a while after that we travelled on, speaking little. We For a while after that we have travelled on, speaking little. Once we went down a side street on both sides of which the pavements were filled with huddled figures. I could see them in the lamplight, sitting, squatting, and some curled up asleep on the ground, squeezed one upon the other, so that there was only just enough space down the road of the street for traffic to pass. They were at they were of every age. I could see babies asleep in mother's arms, and their belongings were all around them: ragged bundles, bird cages, the occasional wheelbarrow piled high with possessions. I have now grown used to such sights, but on that evening I stared out of the car in dismay. The faces were mostly Chinese, but as we came towards the end of the street, I saw clusters of European children. Russians, I suppose. "Refugees from the north of the canal," Morgan said blandly, and turned away. For all his being a refugee himself, he appeared to feel no special empathy for his poorer counterparts. Even when I, even when once I thought we had run over a sleeping form, and glanced back in alarm, my companion merely murmured, "Don't worry, probably some old bundle." Then, after several of minutes, he startled me with a laugh. "School days," he said, all comes back to you. They weren't so bad, I suppose." I glanced at him and I noticed tears welling in his eyes. Then he said, "You know, we should have teamed up. The two miserable loners. That was the thing to do, you and me. We should have teamed up together. Don't know why we didn't. We wouldn't have felt so left out on things if we had done that." I turned to him in astonishment. His face, caught in the changing light, told me he was somewhere far away. As I have said, I could remember well enough Anthony Morgan's being somewhat of a miserable loner at school. It was not that he was particularly bullied or teased by the rest of us. Rather, as I recall it was Morgan himself who, from an early stage, cast himself in that role. It was who always chose to walk by himself, lagging several yards behind the main group, who on bright summer days refused to join in the fun, and who was to be found instead alone in a room, filling a notebook with doodles. All this I can remember clearly enough. In fact, as soon as I had spotted him that night in the gloomy hotel lounge, what had come instantly to my mind was an image of his sulky, solitary walk behind the rest of us. We crossed the quadrangle between the art room and the cloisters, but his assertion that I had likewise been a miserable loner, one with whom he might have made a matching pair, was such an astounding one. It took me a while to realize it was simply a piece of self-delusion on Morgan's part, or in all likelihood something he had invented years ago to make more palatable memories of an unhappy period. As I say, this did not occur to me instantly. Thinking about it now, I see I may have been a little insensitive in my response, for I remember saying something like, "You must have me mixed up with someone else, old fellow. I was always one for mucking in. I dare say you are thinking of that fellow Bigglesworth, Adrian Bigglesworth. He was certainly a bit of a loner." "Bigglesworth?" Morgan thought about this and then shook his head. "I remember that chap. Rather heavy set, jack ears. Old Bigglesworth? My. But no, I wasn't thinking of him." "Well, it wasn't me, old man." "Extraordinary." He shook his head again and then turned back to his window. I too turned away, and for the next little while I gazed out at the nighttime streets. We were once again moving through busy entertainment area. I glanced through the their faces in the crowds, hoping to glimpse Akira's. Then we were in a residential district full of hedges and trees, and before long the driver brought the car to a halt inside the grounds of a large house. Morgan left the vehicle hurriedly. I too got out. The chauffeur made no effort to assist and followed him along a gravel path leading around the side of the house. I suppose I had been expecting a big reception of some sort, but I could now see that this was not what awaited us. The house was for the most part dark, and aside from our own car, there was only one other in the courtyard. Morgan, who was clearly familiar with the house, brought us to the side door, flanked by tall shrubs. He opened it without ringing and ushered me inside. We found ourselves in a spacious hallway lit by candles. Peering before me, I could make out musty-looking scrolls, huge porcelain vases, a lacquered chest of drawers. The smell in the air and incense mingled with the excrement of with that of excrement was oddly comforting. No servants or hosts appeared. My companion continued to stand beside me, not saying a single word. After a time, it occurred to me he was waiting for me to make some comment on our surroundings, so I said, I know little about Chinese artwork, but even to my eye, it is clear we are surrounded by some rather fine things. Morgan stared at me in astonishment, then he shrugged and said, I suppose you're right. Well, let's go in. He led the way further into the house. We were in darkness for several steps, and then I heard voices talking in Mandarin, and I saw light coming from a doorway hung with beaded threads. We passed through the beads, and then a further set of drapes into a large warm room lit with candles and lanterns. What do I remember now of the rest of the evening? It has grown a little hazy in my mind, but let me try and piece it together as clearly as I can. My first thought on entering that room was that we had disturbed some family celebration. I glimpsed a big table laden with food, and seated around it, 8 or 9 people. All were Chinese. The youngest, 2 men in their 20s, were dressed in Western suits, and the rest in traditional dress. An old lady seated at one end of the table was being assisted in her eating by a servant. An elderly man, surprisingly tall and broad for an Oriental, whom I took to be the head of the household, had immediately risen upon our arrival, and now the other males in the company followed his example. But at this stage, my impression of these people remained vague, for very rapidly it was the room itself that had begun to command all my attention. The ceiling was high and beamed. Beyond the diners, right at the back, was a kind of minstrel gallery, from the rail of which hung a brace of paper lanterns. It was this section of the room that had drawn my gaze, and I now continued to stare past the table towards it, hardly hearing my host's words of welcome. For what was dawning upon me was that the entire rear half of the room in which I was now standing was in fact what used to be the entrance of our old Shanghai house. Obviously, some vast restructuring had taken place over the years. I could not, for instance, work out at all the areas through which Morgan and I had just entered related to our old hall, but the minstrel's gallery at the back clearly corresponded with the balcony and at the top of our grand curving staircase. I drifted forward and probably remained standing there for some time, gazing up at the gallery, tracing with my eye the route of our stairs that has been taken place. And as I did so, I found an old memory coming back to me of a period in my childhood when I had made a habit coming down the long curve of stairs at huge speed and taking off 2 or 3 steps from the bottom, usually flapping my arms to land in the depth of a couch position just a little way away. My father, whenever witnessed this, would laugh, but both my mother and Mei Li disapproved. Indeed, my mother, who could never quite explain why this particular practice was wrong, would always threaten to have the couch removed if I persisted in the habit. Then once, when I was around 8, I attempted this feat for the first time in many months to discover the couch could no longer take the impact of my increased weight. On one end of the frame completely collapsed, and I tumbled on the floor utterly shocked. The next instant, though, I had remembered my mother was coming down the stairs behind me and had braced myself for the most terrible dressing down. But my mother, looming over me, had burst out laughing. "Look at your face, Puffin!" she had exclaimed. "If you could only see your face!" I had not been hurt at all, but when my mother had continued to laugh, and perhaps because I was still afraid of scolding, I had begun to make the most of a pain I could feel in my ankle. My mother then had stopped her laughing and had helped me up gently. I remember her then walking me slowly around and round the hall, an arm around my shoulder, saying, "There now, that's better, isn't it? We'll just walk it off. There now, it's nothing." I never was scolded over the incident, and a few days later I came to find the couch has been mended. But although I continued often to jump from the second or third step, I never once again attempted to dive into the couch. I took a few paces around the room, trying to work out the exact spot where the couch would have been, and as I did so, I found I could conjure up only the haziest picture of what it had actually looked like, though I could recall quite vividly the feel of its silky fabric. Then eventually I became conscious of the others in the room, and the fact that they were all watching me with gentle smiles. Morgan and the elderly Chinese man had been conferring quietly. Seeing me turn, Morgan took a step forward, cleared his throat, and began the introductions. He was obviously friendly with the family and reeled off the names without hesitation. As he did, each of them gave a little bow and smile, touching hands together. Only the old lady at the end of the table, whom Morgan introduced with extra deference, went gazing at me impassively. The family was called Lin. Beyond this, I do not remember their names. I remember any names, and it was Mr. Lin himself, the elderly, bulky gentleman, who, from this point, took charge. "I trust, my good sir," he said in English only slightly accented, "that it gives a warm feeling to return here again." "Yes, it does." I gave a little laugh. "Yes, and it's a little strange also. But that is natural," Mr. Lin said. "Now please make yourself comfortable. Mr. Morgan tells me you have already dined, but as you see, we have prepared food for you. We did not know if you cared for Chinese cuisine, so we borrowed the cook of our English neighbor. But perhaps Mr. Banks isn't hungry." This was said. This was said by one of the young men in suits. Then turning to me, the latter continued, "My grandfather is rather the old-fashioned type. He gets very offended if a guest doesn't accept every piece of hospitality." The young man smiled broadly at the old man. "Please don't let him bully you, Mr. Banks. My grandson believes me to be an old-fashioned Chinese," Mr. Lin said, coming closer to me, the smile never leaving his face. "But the truth is, I am born and bred in Shanghai, and here in the international settlement, my parents were obliged to flee the Emperor's Dowager's forces and take sanctuary here in the foreigner city, and I've grown up in Shanghai landers, true and true. My grandson here has no idea what his life is like in the real China. He considers me old-fashioned. Ignore him, my dear sir. There's no need to worry about protocol in this home. If you do not wish to eat, then never mind. I will certainly not bully you." "But you are all so kind," I said, perhaps a little distractedly, for in truth I was still trying to work out how the building had been altered. Then suddenly the old lady said something in Mandarin, and the young man who had addressed me before then said, "My grandmother says that she thought you would never come. It was such a long wait. But now she has seen you. She's very happy you are here." Even before
He had finished translating. The old lady was talking again. This time, when she finished, the young man remained for silent. He looked at his grandfather as though the guidance would then appeared to come to a decision. You must excuse grandmother, she said. She is sometimes a little eccentric. The old lady, perhaps understanding the English, gestured impatiently for a translation. Then the young man sighed and said, my grandmother says that until you came this evening she resented you. That is to say, she was angry that you were to take our home from us. I looked at the young man quite baffled, and now the old lady was talking again. She says that for a long time, her grandson translated, she hoped you would stay away. She believed this home belonged to our family now, but tonight, seeing you in person, seeing the emotion in your eyes, she's able to understand. She now feels in her heart that the agreement is correct. The agreement? But surely, I allowed the words to fade in my mouth, for puzzled as I was, the young man had been translating his grandmother's word. I had started to locate a vague recollection concerning some such arrangement regarding the old house and my eventual return to it. But as I say, my memory of it was a very hazy one, and I sensed that by opening a discussion on the matter, I would only embarrass myself. In any case, just at that moment, Mr. Lin said, I fear we are all the most inconsiderate to Mr. Banks. Here we are, making him chatter to us, when in fact he must be longing to look about the house once more. Then turning to me with a kindly smile, he said, come with me, good sir. There will be time enough to talk to everyone later. Come this way and I will show you the house. That was the end of chapter 14. Moments for a good sip of coffee. Unfortunately, the lady went away. Alright. We are continuing. Okay, Jin. We are continuing. We're continuing part 5. We are continuing part 5 of When We Were Orphaned by Kazuo Ishiguro, chapter 15 right now. Chapter 15. Chapter 15. For the next several minutes, I followed Mr. Lin all around the building. Despite his age, my host showed little sign of infirmity. He carried his bulk steadily, if slowly, hardly ever pausing for breath. I pursued his dark gown, whispering slippers up and down the narrow stairs, and along the back corridors lit often only by a single lantern. He led me through areas that were bare and cobwebbed, past numerous neatly stacked wooden crates of rice wine. Elsewhere, the house became sumptuous, and there were beautiful screens and wall hangings, clusters of porcelain displayed within the alcove. Every so often, he would open a door, then stand back to let me pass. I entered various kinds of rooms, but for some time at least, saw nothing at all familiar to me. Then, finally, I stepped through a door and felt something tugging at my memory. It took a few seconds more, but then I recognized with a wave of emotion our old library. It had been greatly altered. The ceiling was much higher, and the wall had been knocked through to make a space of L shape. And where there had been once double doors through into our dining room, there was now a partition against which stacked more crates of rice wine. But it was unmistakably the same room where as a child I had done much of my homework. I drifted further into the room, looking all around me. After a while, I became aware Mr. Lin regarding me and gave him a self-conscious smile, at which point he said, "No doubt, much has been changed. Please accept my apologies, but you must understand, over 18 years, which is how long we have lived here, a few alterations have been inevitable to meet the needs of my household and of my business. I understand the occupants before us and those before them carried out extensive alterations, most unfortunate, my good sir, but I suppose few could have foreseen that one day you and your parents—" He trailed off, perhaps because he thought I was not listening, perhaps because, like most Chinese, he was uncomfortable with apologies. I went on gazing about me for a while longer and then asked him, "So this house, it no longer owned by Morgan Brook and Byatt?" He looked astonished and then laughed. "Sir, I am the owner of this house." I saw how I have insulted him and said hurriedly, "Yes, of course. I do beg your pardon. Don't worry, my good sir." His genial smile had quickly returned. It was not an unreasonable question. After all, when you and your dear parents lived here, there was no doubt the situation. But I believe that was long ceased to be. My good sir, if you will only consider how much Shanghai has changed over the years, everything has changed and changed again. All this," he sighed and gestured to us. "By comparison, these are all small changes. There are parts of the city I once knew so well, places I would walk every day. I now go there and know not which way to turn to. Change all the time, and now the Japanese, they wish to make their changes here, and the most terrible changes may yet overtake us, but one must not be so pessimistic." For a moment, we both stood there in silence. Sorry, I need to highlight this quote. It's a really good quote over there. For a moment we stood there in silence, continuing to look about us. Then he said, "My family, of course, will be saddened to leave this house. My father died here. 2 grandchildren were born here. But when my wife spoke earlier, and you must forgive her frankness, Mr. Banks, she did speak for all of us. We will consider it a great honor and privilege to return this house to you and your parents. Now, my good sir, let us continue if we may." I believe it was not long after that we climbed a carpeted staircase, one of which certainly did not exist in my time, and stepped into a luxuriously furnished bedroom. There were rich fabrics, lanterns, and casting a reddish glow. "My wife's room," Mr. Lin said. I could see it was a sanctuary, a cozy boudoir, where the old lady probably whiled away most of her day. In the warm lantern light, I could make out a card table upon which number of different sort of games appeared to be in the progress. A writing desk with a column of tiny gold-hassled drawers running down on one side, a large four-poster bed with layers of veil-like drapes. Elsewhere, my gaze caught various fine ornaments and items of amusements whose exact natures I could not guess. Madame must like this room, I said eventually. I can see her world here. It suits her. But you mustn't concern yourself on her behalf, my good sir. We will find her another room she will come to love equally. He had spoken he had spoken to reassure me, but something fragile had entered his voice. He now drifted further into the room over to a dressing table and became absorbed by some small object there, perhaps a brooch. After several moments he said quietly, "She was very beautiful when she was younger. The most beautiful flower, my good sir, you cannot imagine. In this respect I am like a Westerner in my heart. I have never wanted any wife but her. One wife, quite enough. Of course, I took others. I'm Chinese after all. Even if I have lived all my life here in the foreigner city, I felt obliged to take other wives. But she's the one I truly cared for. The others have all gone now, and she is left. I miss the others, but I'm glad. In my heart, I'm glad that in our old age, it's just the two of us again." For a few seconds, he seemed to forget my presence. Then he turned to me and said, "This room. I wonder how you will come to use it. Pardon me. This is a very wonder how you. This is very impertinent. But do you think this room will be for your own good wife? Oh, of course, I am aware that for many foreigners, however wealthy, husband and wife will share the same room. I wonder then if this room will go to yourself and your good wife. My curiosity, I realize, is the most impertinent, but this room is very special for me. It's my hope that you will put it to special use." "Yes." I looked around it carefully. Then I said, "Perhaps not my wife. My wife, you see, to speak frankly, I realized that in the talk of a wife, I had had a picture of Sarah in my mind. Covering my embarrassment, I went on quickly. What I mean, sir, is that I'm not married yet. I have no wife, but I think this room will suit my mother." "Ah, yes. After all the inconveniences she has had to suffer, this room will be ideal to her. And your father? I wonder, will he share it with her in the Western manner? Please forgive my great intrusion." "It's no intrusion, Mr. Lin. After all, by letting me in here, it is you who have allowed me great intimacy. You have every right to ask this question. It's just that this is all rather sudden, and I've not yet had time to fully make my plans." I drifted into silence and went on gazing at the room. Then, after a moment, I said to him, "Mr. Lin, I'm afraid this might upset you, but you have been more open and generous than I could ever have expected, and I feel you deserve my honesty. You said yourself just now how inevitable that it is that the house undergoes alterations whenever its occupants change. Well, sir, dear as this room are to you, I'm afraid that once my family are again living here, we will carry out our own alterations. This room, too, I fear, will change beyond recognition." Mr. Lin closed his eyes and there was a heavy silence. I wondered if he would become angry, and for a second regretted being so honest with him. But then, when he opened his eyes again, he was regarding me gently. "Of course," he said, "it is quite natural. You will wish to restore this house to just the way it was when you were a boy. That is quite natural, my good sir. I understand it perfectly." I thought about this for a moment and then I said, "Well, actually, Mr. Lin, we would probably not turn it back exactly to what it was then. For one thing, as I remember it, there were many things we were unhappy about. My mother, for instance, never had her own study. With all her campaign work and a little bureau in the bedroom was never quite adequate. My father too wanted a little workshop for his woodwork. What I'm saying is that there's no need to turn back the clock just for the sake of it." "That is most wise, Mr. Banks. And although you have not yet taken a wife, Perhaps soon there will come the day when you have the needs of a wife and children to consider. That's certainly possible. Unfortunately, just at the present, this question of a wife, in my case, Western custom notwithstanding, I became very confused and stopped, but the old man nodded sagely and saying, "Of course, in the matters of the heart, things are never simple." Then he asked, "You wish for children, good sir? I wonder how many you will have." As a matter of fact, I already have a child, a young girl, though she isn't really my daughter as such. She was an orphan and now she's in my care. I do look on her as a daughter. I had not thought about Jennifer for some time, and mentioning her like this so unexpectedly caused a powerful feeling to well up within me. Images of her ran through my mind, and I thought of her at her school, wondering how she was and what she had been doing that day. I perhaps turned away to hide my emotions. In any case, when I next looked at him, Mr. Lin was nodding again. "We Chinese are used to such arrangements," he said. "Blood is important, but so is household. My father took in an orphan girl and she grew up with us as though she were my sister. I regarded her as such, though I knew always of her origins. When she died in the cholera epidemic when I was still a young man, I felt as much grief as I had as when my blood sisters passed away. If I may say so, Mr. Lin, it's been a great pleasure to talk to you. It's rare to find someone so immediately understanding." He gave a small bow, bringing his fingertips together before him. "When one has lived long as I have, and through the turmoil of these years, one knows many joys and sadnesses. I hope your adopted daughter will be happy here." Sorry, I need to highlight this quote. Very good quote. "I wonder which room will you give her, but of course, forgive me as you say, you will alter. In fact, one of the rooms we saw earlier would be ideal for Jennifer. She had a little wooden it had a little wooden edge running along the wall. She likes such a ledge. Yes, for her things. And in fact, there's one for the person I shall be accommodating here in this house. I suppose she was officially some sort of a servant, but in our household she was always much more. Her name is Mei Li. She was your ama, good sir?" I nodded. "She would be older now. I'm sure she'd appreciate a rest from her work. Children can be very taxing. It was my intention that when she was old, she would go on living with us here." "That is most kind-hearted of you. One so often hears for foreign families who threw out the ama once the charges are grown. Such women were often to be seen ending their days as street beggars." I gave laugh. "I hardly think that could ever happen to Mei Li. In fact, the very thought is quite absurd. In any case, as I say, she'll be living here with us. As soon as my task is accomplished, I will turn my mind to locating her. I don't imagine it will be so difficult. And tell me, good sir, will you give her a room in the servants' quarters or with the family?" "With the family, certainly. My parents might take a dim view of that, but then really, I'm the head of the household now." Mr. Lin smiled. "According to your custom, that will certainly be so. For us Chinese, fortunately me, the old are permitted to go on ruling the house well into their foolish years." The old man laughed to himself and turned towards the door. I was about to follow, but just at that moment, quite suddenly and very vividly, I found another memory returning to me. I have thought about it since, and I have no idea why it was that particular recollection rather than any other. It was of an occasion when I was 6 or 7, when my mother and I had raced each other along the stretch of the lawn, and I do not know where exactly this was. I would suppose now we are in one of those parks, perhaps Jesville Parks, for I can remember a trellised fence beside where we ran, covered in climbing flowers and creepers. It was a warm day, but not especially sunny. I had impulsively challenged my mother to a race to some marker a short distance before us as a way of showing off to her my improved running ability. I had assumed completely that I would outpace her and that she would then express in her usual way her delighted surprise at this latest manifestation of my maturing prowess. But to my annoyance, she had kept up with me all the way, laughing as she went, although I was running with all my strength. I do not remember which of us actually won, but I still recall my fury at her and my sense that I had suffered a grave injustice. It was this incident that came back to me that night as I stood in the snugly sheltered atmosphere of Madame Lin's bedroom. Or rather, a fragment of it, a memory of me pushing into the wind with all my might, my mother's laughing presence beside me, the rustling of her skirt, and my rising frustration. Sir, I said to my host, I wonder if I may ask you. You say you have lived all your life here in the settlement. I wonder then if during the time you have ever met my mother. I never had the good fortune to meet her in person, Mr. Lin said, but of course I knew of her and of her great campaign. I admired her, like all decent-minded people. I am sure she is a fine lady, and I've heard it said she is very beautiful. I suppose she might be. One never thinks about whether one's mother is beautiful. Oh, I've heard it said that she is the most beautiful English woman in Shanghai. I suppose she might be, but of course, she's older now. Certain kinds of beauty never fades. My wife, he gestured at the room. She is as beautiful to me now as the day I married her. When he said this, I suddenly felt as though I was intruding, and this time it was I who made the first move to leave. I do not remember a great deal more about my visit to the house that evening. Perhaps we stayed for another hour, talking and eating with the family around the table. In any case, I know I parted from the Lin family on the best of terms. It was during the journey back, however, that Morgan and I rather fell out. It was probably my fault. I was by that stage tired and somewhat overwrought. We have been traveling through the night for a while in silence, and my mind had perhaps begun to drift back to the immense task before me. For I remember saying to Morgan quite out of the blue, Look, you have been here for a few years now. Tell me, have you come across a certain Inspector Kung? Inspector Kung? Policeman or something? When I was a child here, Inspector Kung was something of a legend. As a matter of fact, he was the officer originally in charge of my parents' case. To my surprise, I heard Morgan beside me gave a guffaw. Then he said, Kung? Old man Kung? Oh yes, of course, he used to be a police inspector. Well then, it's no wonder nothing got sorted out at the time. His tone took me aback, and I said rather coldly, In those days, Inspector Kong was the most revered detective in Shanghai, if not the whole China. Well, he still has something of a name for himself. I can tell you, old man Kung, well, I never. I'm glad to at least hear that he's still in the city. Do you have any idea where I would find him? Simplest ways, just to wander around the French town any night after dark. Bound to come across him sooner or later. Usually see him in a heap on the pavement. Or if he had been let into some hole in the bar, he'd be snoring away in a dark corner. Are you implying Inspector Kong became a drunk? Drink, opium, usual Chinaman stuff. But he is a character. Tells stories about his glory days and people give him coins. I think you're thinking of the wrong man, old fellow. Don't think so, old chap. Old man Kong. So he really was a policeman. I always fancy he was making all that thing up. Most of his stories are preposterous. What's the matter, old fellow? The trouble with you, Morgan, is that you keep muddling things. First you muddle me up with Bigglesworth, then you get Inspector Kong muddled up with some worthless ragamuffin. Being out here's got your head all soft, old man. Now look here, Pipe down a bit. What I'm telling you, you'll hear from anyone else you care to ask, and I'd rather take exceptions to your comments. Nothing soft about my head. We may return to a slightly more civil terms by the time he dropped me off at the cafe, but our parting was distinctly cold, and I have not seen Morgan again since then. As for Inspector Cone, it had been my intention after that evening to seek him out without delay, but for whatever reason, perhaps I feared Morgan might have been telling the truth. I have never made it a priority, at least not until yesterday when my search through the police archives threw up the inspector's name again in the most dramatic fashion. This morning, incidentally, when I mentioned Inspector Cone in passing to MacDonald, his reaction was not dissimilar to Morgan's that night, and I suspect here was yet another reason for my impatience with MacDonald as we faced each other in his airless little office overlooking the consulate grounds. All the same, with a little more effort, I know I could have made a much better job of it. My central error this morning was to allow him to goad me into losing my temper. At one point I fear I was practically shouting at him. Mr. MacDonald, it simply isn't enough to leave things to what you insist on calling my powers. I have no such powers. I'm a mere mortal, and I can only achieve my goals if I am given the sort of basic assistance that allows me to go on about my work. I have not asked much of you, sir. Hardly anything at all. And what I have said, I have put you very clearly. I wish to speak to this communist informer. Just speak with him. A short interview would suffice. I made this request to you in the clearest terms. I fail to understand why arrangements still have not been made. Why is that, sir? Why is that? What can possibly be impeding you? But look here, old fellow. This is hardly a matter of my office. If you wish, I'll get the police commissioner to get over to see to you. Mind you, even then, you see, I'm not at all sure you get anywhere useful. It's not they who have the yellow snake. I fully understand it is the Chinese government who are keeping the yellow snake under their protection. That is why I have come to you and not to the police. I am aware that in a matter of this magnitude, the police are an irrelevance. I'll see what I can do, old chap, but you must understand, this isn't a British colony. We can't go ordering the Chinese about. But I'll talk to someone in the appropriate office. Don't bet on anything happening too quickly, though. Chiang Kai-shek had informers before, but never one with quite such extensive knowledge of the Reds network. Chiang would lose a few good battles with the Japs before allowing anything to happen to this yellow snake chap. As far as Chiang is concerned, you see, the real enemies is not the Japs but the Reds. I gave a loud sigh. Mr. MacDonald, I do not care about Chiang Kai-shek or his priorities. Just now, I have a case to solve and I would like you to do whatever you can to secure an interview for me with this informer. I am putting it to you personally. And if all my efforts come to nothing because this simple request is not granted, I shan't hesitate to let it be known that it was you I came to. Now, really, old fellow, please, there's no need to take this sort of line. No need at all. We are all friends here. We all wish you to succeed. Take my word for it, we really do. Look here, I've said I'll do all I can. I'll talk to a few people, people in the line of work. I'll talk to them and I'll tell them how strongly you feel. But you have to understand, there's only so much we can do with the Chinese. Then he leaned forward and said confidingly, you might try the French. They have a lot of little understandings with Chiang, off the record sort, the kind of thing we wouldn't touch. That's the French for you. Perhaps there's something in MacDonald's suggestion. Perhaps I might indeed get some useful help from the French authorities, but frankly, since this morning, I have not given this option much thought. It is clear to me that MacDonald, for reasons which as yet remain unclear, per- is prevaricating that once he has recognized the overwhelming importance of granting my request, he will do whatever is necessary. Unfortunately, it is probable I handled this morning's meeting so incompetently I will have to tackle him once further time. It is not a prospect to which I particularly look forward to, but at least the next time my approach will be different and he will not find it easy to send me away empty-handed. That is the end of chapter 15. Yeah, it's really political, this one. Extremely. It's political, definitely. I agree with Eugene. Sorry, my throat hasn't been in the best condition today, but I'm trying my best. Alright, we just finished chapter 15 of part 5, sorry. Now, we are on part 6 of When We Were Orphaned by Kazuo Ishiguro. Part 6, Cathay Hotel, Shanghai, 20th October 1937. Chapter 16. One second, please. This book is also so long that I had to divide it into 4 days of reading. Chapter 16 of Kazuo Ishiguro's When We Were Orphaned. I knew we were somewhere in the French concession, not far from the harbor, but otherwise I had lost my bearings. The chauffeur had for some time been steering us through tiny alleys quite unsuitable for a car, sounding his horn repeatedly to get pedestrians out of the way, and I had begun to feel ridiculous, like a man who has brought a horse into a house. But eventually the car stopped, and the driver, opening my door, pointed out the entrance to the Inn of Morning Happiness. I was led inside by a thin Chinese man with one eye. What comes back to me today is an overall impression of low ceilings, dark damp wood, and the usual smell of sewage. But the establishment seemed clean enough. At some point we stepped around 3 old women on their knees, diligently scrubbing the floorboards. Somewhere near the rear of the building we came to a corridor with a long row of doors. I was reminded of stables or even prison, but these cubicles, it turns out, contained the inn's guests. The one-eyed man knocked on one of the doors and then opened it before any reply had been given. I stepped into the narrow space. There was no window, but the partition did not go upright, the ceiling, the last foot or so, being wire mesh, thus allowing light and air to circulate. For all that, the cubicle was stuffy and dark, and even when the afternoon sun broke brightly outside, it resulted only in the mesh throwing odd patterns over the floor. The figure lying on the bed appeared to be asleep, but then moved his legs when I took up position in the gap between the bed and the wall. The one-eyed man mumbled something and vanished, the door closing behind him. Former Inspector Kong looked a little more than bones. The skin on his face, neck was shriveled and spotted. His mouth hung open slackly. A bare, stick-like leg was protruding from the coarse blanket, though on his top half I saw he had on a surprisingly white undershirt. He did not at first make any attempt to sit up, and appeared only vaguely to register my presence, and yet he did not seem directly under the sway of opium or alcohol, and eventually, as I continued to state who I was and my purpose in coming to see him, he became more coherent and began to show signs of courtesy. I think a good writer would not. Okay, so Jin just said Ishiguro really be flexing when he said that this is not his best book. Hi, Mr. Hearts. I think a good writer would not pick a favorite from their book. I think a good writer wouldn't say things like, "Oh, this is my best book and this is my worst books." But I think Ishiguro is just being humble when he's like saying that this is not his best book. It's definitely very wordy and very political and very. I don't want to use the word try hard because when I think about the word try hard, I think about Miyazaki. Uh, Wait, what's his name? Not Miyazaki. I don't even remember. I don't even want to remember his name because I hate him so much. The writer for Kafka on the Shore, what's his name? I legit, it's off my head. I can't remember his name. It's not. That one is pretentious. The writer for Kafka on the Shore is pretentious bastard. I hate him. Um, but I just think that Ishiguro is being humble when he says it's not his best book. It's not that bad. So far, I'm enjoying it. Uh, but it's way too similar to the Remains of the Day, and the Remains of the Day is such an amazing book. It's such a great book. Remains of the Day is so good. This one does feel a bit like he's trying to write in the way like in the Remains of the Day, but it's not as effective as the Remains of the Day. The Remains of the Day was really, really good. Yeah, Remains of the Day is just amazing. Anyway, sorry to people who are interested in the reading and not about my babbling. Just so you know, Jin, there are people on my YouTube channel that I ported all my live streams to. There are people who actually timestamps chapters and when I start and and they are only there because they want to listen to me read. So I feel really bad for me to stop in the middle of the reading right now to discuss about books. Yes, exactly. He's very good at depicting tension between characters without making. Yeah, the tension between the main characters in The Remains of the Day was so good. Anyway, okay, continue. Sorry. He did not at first make any attempt to sit up, and appeared only vaguely to register my presence, and yet he did not seem directly under the sway of opium or alcohol, and eventually, as I continued to state who I was and my purpose in coming to see him, he became more coherent and began to show signs of courtesy. "I'm sorry, sir." His English, when it came, was fluent enough. "I have no tea." He began to mumble something in Mandarin, shuffling his legs about beneath his blanket. Then he appeared to remember himself again and said, "Please forgive me. I'm not well, but soon I will recover my good health." "I sincerely hope so," I said. "After all, you were one of the finest detectives ever to serve in the SMP." Really? How kind of you to say so, sir. Yes, perhaps I was a good officer once. With a sudden effort, he raised himself and placed his bare feet gingerly down onto the floor. Perhaps out of modesty. Perhaps because he was cold. He kept his blanket gathered around his middle. But in the end, he went on. This city defeats every. He went on. But in the end, he went on. This city defeats you. Every man betrays his friend. You trust someone and it turns out to be the pay of a gangster. The government are gangsters too. How is a detective to do his duty in a place like this? I might have a secret for you. Would you care for a secret? No, thank you, sir. Just let me say this. When I was a boy, I followed your exploits with great admiration. When you were a boy? Yes, sir. The boy next door and I... I gave a little laugh. We used to play at being you. You were our hero. Is that so? The old man shook his head and smiled. Is that so indeed? Well then, I'm more sorry I cannot offer you anything. No tea, no secret. Actually, sir, you may be able to offer me something much more important. I came to you today because I believe you may be able to provide a vital clue. In the spring of 1915, there was a case you investigated, a shooting incident in the restaurant called Wu Ching Lo in Fuchao Road. 3 people have died and several more injured. You arrested the 2 men responsible. In the police record, the matter is referred as the Wu Ching Lo shooting incident. It's many years now, I realize, but Inspector Kong, I wonder if you remember this case. Behind me, from perhaps 2 or 3 rooms away, there came the sound of frantic coughing. Inspector Kong remained deep in thought, then said, I remember the Wu Ching Lo case very well. It was one of my most satisfying moments. I sometimes think about that case, even these days, laying here in this bed. Then perhaps you remember that you interrogated a suspect whom you subsequently established was unconnected with the shooting. According to the records, the man's name was Chiang Wei. You interrogated him concerning to the Wu Cheng Lo, but he made some other quite unrelated confessions. Though his body remained a sagging sack of bones, the old detective's eyes were now full of life. But he was afraid. Full of life. That's correct, he said. He had nothing to do with the shooting, but he was afraid and he began to talk. He confessed everything. He confessed, I remember, to having been a member of a kidnapping gang some years earlier. Excellent, sir. That's just exactly as recorded in the files. Now, Inspector Kung, this is very important. This man gave you some addresses of houses that the gang had used to hold the captives. Inspector Kung has been gazing at the flies buzzing around the wire mesh near the ceiling. But now his eyes turned slowly to where I was standing. That is so, he said quietly. But Mr. Banks, we had all those houses checked thoroughly. The kidnappings we talked about for years in the past. We found nothing suspicious in those houses. I know, Inspector Kong, you have done everything duty required you must thoroughly, but of course, you were investigating the shooting. It would be perfectly natural if you didn't expend your energy on such a side issue. What I'm suggesting is that if powerful people had gone some length to prevent you searching one of those houses, you would perhaps not persisted. The old detective was deep in thought again. He said finally, there was one house I remember now. My man brought me reports. All the other houses, 7 of them, I received reports. I remember it troubled me at the time. One last house, no report. My men were being prevented in some way. Yes, I remember wondering about this. A detective's nose. You know what I mean, sir. And that remaining house, You never did see a report on it. Correct, sir. But as you say, it was not a great priority. You understand, the Wu Ching Lo matter was a large matter. It had caused much outrage. The hunt for the killers has gone on for weeks. And I believe it had defeated two of your more senior colleagues. Inspector Kong smiled. As I have said, it was a most satisfying moment in my career. I came on to the case when others have failed. The city was talking of nothing else. I was able, after a few days, to apprehend the killers. I read the records. I was filled with admiration. But now the old man was staring at me intently. Eventually, he said slowly, "That house. The house. The man failed to go to that house. You are saying?" "Yes, it's my belief that is where my parents are being held." "I see." He fell silent for a time, digesting this colossal idea. "There's no question of negligence on your part," I said. "Let me say again, I read the reports with great admiration. Your men did not get to the house because they were obstructed by the persons in the higher echelon of the police force. People we know now were in the play of criminal organizations." The coughing had started again. Mr. Kong remained silent for a moment longer, then looked up at me again and said slowly, You've come to ask if I can help you find this house. Unfortunately, the archives are in chaos and it's a disgrace how things have been run in this city. Papers have been misfiled, others lost altogether. In the end, I decided I'll do better if I come here for you, to ask you, unlikely though it is, if you remember something, anything about that house. The house. Let me try to remember. The old man closed his eyes in concentration, and then after a time he shook his head. The Wu Qing Lo shooting is over 20 years ago. I am sorry, I cannot remember anything about this house. Please try and remember something, sir. Do you recall even which district it was in? Whether, for instance, it was in the international settlement? He thought for another moment, then shook his head again. It's a long time ago, and my head, it doesn't work in a normal way. Sometimes I remember nothing, not even of the day before. But I shall try and remember, perhaps tomorrow, perhaps the day after. I shall wake up and remember something. Mr. Banks, I am so sorry, but just now, no, I remembered nothing. It was evening by the time I returned to the international settlement. I believe I spent an hour or so in my room going through my notes again, trying to put behind me the disappointment of my meeting with the old inspector. I did not go down to supper until after 8. When I took my usual corner table in the splendid dining room, I remember I did not have much of an appetite that evening, and was about to abandon my main course and return to my work when the waiter brought in Sarah's note. I have it here now. It is no more than a scribble on an unlined paper, the upper edge torn off. It is doubtful whether she gave the words much thought. It simply asked me to meet her at once at the half landing between third and fourth floor of the hotel. Looking at it now, its connection with that small incident at Mr. Tony Keswick's house a week previously seems all too obvious. That is to say, Sarah probably would not have written a note at all had it not been for what took place between us. Oddly enough, though, when the waiter first presented it to me, I failed to make hang on just a moment. I failed to make such association, and I sat there for some moments, quite mystified as to why she should summon me in such a way. I should say here that by this point I had ran into her a further 3 times since the night at Lucky Chan's house. On 2 of these occasions, we had seen each other only fleetingly in the presence of others, and little had passed between us. On the third occasion, too, the night of the dinner at the home of Mr. Keswick, the chairman of Jardine Matheson, I suppose we were again in a public place and exchanged barely a word, yet, with hindsight, our encounter there would well be viewed as some sort of important turning point. I had turned up a little late that evening, and by the time I was shown into Mr. Keswick's vast conservatory, upwards of 60 guests were already taking their places in several tables situated among the foliage and trailing vines. I spotted Sarah on the far side of the room. Sir Cecil was not present, but I could see she too was searching for a seat, and so made no attempt to approach her. It appears to be a Shanghai custom at such events for guests, as soon as dessert has been served, even before they have had time properly to eat it, to abandon the original seating plan and mingle freely. No doubt, then, it was in my mind that once these points had come along, I might go over and exchange a few words with Sarah. However, when dessert finally appeared, I was unable to get away from the woman seated beside me, who wished to explain in some details the political position in Indochina. Then no sooner had I extricated myself from her than our host stood up to announce that the time had come for the turns. He proceeded to introduce the first performer, a willowy lady who emerged from a table behind me, went to the front and began to recite an amusing poem evidently composed by herself. She was followed by a man who sang unaccompanied a few verses of Gilbert and Sullivan, and I surmised that the majority of those around me had come ready to perform. Guests went up after one another, sometimes in twos and threes. There were madrigals, comic routines. The tone was invariably frivolous, sometimes even bawdy. Then a large red-faced man, a director of the Hong Kong and Shanghai Bank, I learned later, made his way to the front, wearing a kind of a tunic over his dinner jacket, and began to read from a scroll a monologue satirizing various aspects of Shanghai life. Almost all the references to individuals, to the bathroom arrangement at particular clubs, to incidents that had occurred on recent newspapers, were entirely lost on me, but very quickly every section of the room became filled with laughter. At this point I looked around for Sarah, and saw her sitting over in a corner amidst a group of ladies, laughing as heartily as any of them. The woman beside her, who clearly had had a fair amount to drink, was roaring with almost indecent abandon. The red-faced man's performance had been going for perhaps 5 minutes, during which the level of hilarity seemed only to rise, when he delivered a particularly effective volley of 3 or 4 lines which set the room virtually howling. It was at this point that I happened to glance over once more to Sarah. At first, the scene appeared much as it had before. There was Sarah, laughing helplessly amidst her companions. If I went on watching her for several more seconds, it was simply because I was rather surprised that after barely a year, she was already so intimate with Shanghai society to the extent that these obscure jokes would reduce her to such state. And it was then, as I was gazing at her, pondering this point, that I realized that she was not laughing at all, that she was not, as I supposed, wiping away tears of laughter, but was in fact weeping. For a moment, I went on staring at her, and unable quite to credit my eyes. Then, as the uproar continued, I rose quietly and moved through the crowd. After a little maneuvering, I found myself standing behind her, and now there was no further doubt. Amidst all the gaiety, Sarah was crying uncontrollably. Uncontrollably. I can't even pronounce the word properly. Uncontrollably. Gosh, so many L's. I'm so Asian. I had approached from behind so that when I offered her my handkerchief, she gave a start. Then, looking up at me, she fixed me for perhaps as long as 4 or 5 seconds with searching gaze in which gratitude was mixed up with something like a question. I inclined my head to read better her look, but then she had taken my handkerchief and turned back towards the red-faced man. And when the next burst of laughter seized the room, Sarah, too, with an impressive show of will, let out a laugh even as she pressed the handkerchief to her eyes. Conscious that I might draw unwanted attention to her, I then made my way back to my seat, and indeed did not go near her again that evening other than to exchange rather formal good nights with her in the entrance hall alongside the many other guests taking their leave of one another. But I suppose for a few days afterwards I entertained a vague expectation of hearing something from her concerning what had occurred. It is then a measure of how much I had become engrossed in my investigations by then that by the time that note was brought to me in the dining room at the Cathay Hotel, I failed to make any connections with the earlier incidents and made my way up to the grand staircase, wondering why it was she wished to see me. What Sarah described as the half landing is in fact the substantial area strewn with armchairs, occasional tables, and potted plants. In the morning particularly, with the great windows open and the ceiling fan whirring, I imagine it is a pleasant enough place for a guest to read newspaper and take some coffee. Sounds good. At night, though, abandoned it has a rather abandoned atmosphere, perhaps owing to the shortages. There is no lighting other than that coming from the staircase, and whatever leaks in through the windows from the bund below. On that particular evening, the area was deserted aside from Sarah, whose figure I could see silhouetted against the huge panes, gazing out at the night sky. As I made my way towards her, I knocked into a chair, and the sound made her turn. "I thought there would be a moon," she said. "But there isn't. There aren't even any shells being fired tonight." "Yes, it's been quiet the last few nights. Cecile says that the soldiers on both sides are exhausted now." "I dare say." "Christopher, come here. It's all right. I'm not going to do anything to you, but we have to talk more quietly." I moved closer till I was beside her. I could now see the bund below and this line of lights marking the waterfront promenade. "I've arranged everything," she said quietly. "It wasn't easy, but it's all done now." "You've done what exactly?" "Everything. Papers, boats, everything. I can't stay here anymore. I tried my best, and I'm so tired now. I'm going away." "I see. And Cecile? Does he know of your intentions?" "It won't come entirely as a surprise to him, but I suppose it'll be a shock all the same." "Are you shocked, Christopher?" "No, not really. From what I had observed, I could see something like this might happen on the cards. But before you take such a drastic step, are you sure there aren't..." "Oh, I've thought about everything there is to think about." "It's no good, even if Cecile were willing to go back to England tomorrow. Besides, he has lost so much money here. He's determined not to leave until he has won it all back." "I can see this trip out here rather fallen short of your hopes. I'm sorry." "It's hardly just a trip out here." She gave a laugh, then went quiet. After a moment, she said, "I tried to love Cecile. I tried very hard. He's not a bad man. You probably think that he is, the way you have seen him before, but that's not how he always was. And I realized a lot of it is to do with me. What he needed at this stage of life was a good rest, but then I came along and he felt he had to do a little bit more. That was my fault. When we came out here, he did try at first, tried awfully hard, but it was beyond him. And I think that's what it was. That's what broke him. Perhaps once I'm gone, he'll be able to pull himself together again. But where will you go? Will you return to England? Just now. Just there's not enough money to return. I'm going to Macau. Then after that, I shall have to see. Anything might happen then. In fact, that's why I wanted to talk with you, Christopher. I'll confess. I'm rather frightened. I don't want to go out there all by myself. I did wonder if you would go with me. Do you mean with you to Macau? Go with you tomorrow? Yes, go with me to Macau tomorrow. We can decide after that where to go next. If you wanted to, we could just drift around the South China Sea for a while, or we could go to the South America, run away like thieves in the night. Wouldn't that be fun? I suppose I was surprised that when I heard her utter these words, but what I remember now, overwhelming anything else, was an almost tangible sense of relief. Indeed, for a second or two I experienced a sort of giddiness one might when coming suddenly out of the light and fresh air after being trapped a long time in some dark chamber. It was as though these suggestions of hers, which for all I knew she had thrown out on an impulse, carried with it a huge authority, something that brought me a kind of dispensation I had never dared to hope for. Hardly had this feeling swept over me, however, than I supposed another part of me grew quickly alert to the possibility of this being some test she has set for me. For I remember that when I at last responded, it was to say, "The difficulty is my work here. I'll have to finish my work here first. After all, the whole world's on the brink of catastrophe. What would people think of me if I abandoned them all at this stage? Come to that, what would you think of me?" Oh, Christopher, we are both as bad as each other. We've got to stop thinking like that. Otherwise, there will be nothing for either of us. Just more of what we have had all these years. Just more loneliness, more days with nothing in our lives except some whatever it is telling us we haven't done enough yet. We have to put all behind. We have to put that all behind us now. Leave your work, Christopher. You have spent enough of your life already on all that. Let's go away tomorrow. Let's not waste a single day more. Let's go before it's too late for us. Too late for what exactly? Too late for... Oh, I don't know. All I know is that I've wasted all these years looking for something, a sort of trophy I would get only if I really did enough to deserve it, but I don't want it anymore. I want something else now, something warm and sheltering, something I can turn to regardless of what I do, regardless of who I become, something that will just be there, like tomorrow's sky. That's what I want now, and I think it's what you should want too. But it will be too late. Soon will become too sad to change. If we don't take our chance now, another may never come for either of us. Christopher, what are you going to do to that poor plant? Indeed, I realized I had been absent-mindedly stripping leaves off a palm standing right next to us and depositing them onto the carpet. I'm sorry. I let out a laugh, rather destructive. Then I said, "Even if you are right, what you are saying just now, even then, it's not so easy for me. Because you see, there's Jennifer." When I said this, a vivid image came back to me of the last time she and I had spoken, the time we had said our goodbyes in the pleasant little sitting room at the rear of her school, the sunshine of a gentle English spring afternoon falling across the oak panel walls. I suddenly remembered again her face as she took in what I was saying, the thoughtful nod she gave as she thought it over, and then those quite unexpected words she came out with. "You see, there's Jennifer," I said again, aware that I was in danger of drifting into a daydream. "Even now, she'll be waiting for me." But I've thought of that. I thought about it all carefully. I just know she and I can be friends. More than friends. The three of us, we could be, well, a little family, just like any other family. I've thought about it, Christopher. It could be wonderful for us all. We could send for her as soon as we have settled on a plan. We might even go back to Europe, to Italy, say, and she could join us there. I know I could be a mother to her, Christopher. I'm sure I could. I went on thinking quietly for a moment and then said, "Very well." What do you mean, Christopher, very well? I mean, yes, I'll go with you. I'll go with you. And we'll do as you say. Yes, you might be right, Jennifer. Us, everything, it might turn out well. As soon as I said this, I could feel a massive weight lifting off me. So much so that I may well let out a loud sigh. Sarah, meanwhile, had come a step closer and for a second gazed deep into my face. I even thought she would kiss me, but she seemed to check herself at the last moment and said instead, "Dad, listen. Listen carefully. We must do this correctly. Pack no more than one suitcase and don't send on any trunks. There'll be some money waiting for us in Macau and we could buy what we need there. I'll send someone to come and get you, a driver, tomorrow afternoon at 3:30. I'll see to it he's someone to be trusted, but all the same, don't tell him anything you don't need to. He'll bring you to where I'll be waiting, Christopher. You look as if something heavy just hit you on the head. You're not gonna let me down, are you?" "No, no. I'll be ready. 3:30 tomorrow. Don't worry. I'll follow you anywhere, wherever you want to go in the world." Perhaps it was simply an impulse. Perhaps it was the memory of how we had parted that night we had brought Sir Cecile back from the gaming house. In any case, I suddenly reached forward, grasped one of her hands in both of mine and kissed it, sorry. After that, I believe I looked up, still clutching her hand, uncertain what to do next. It is even possible I let out an awkward giggle. In the end, she freed the hand gently and touched my cheek. "Thank you, Christopher," she said quietly. "Thank you for agreeing. Everything suddenly feels so different. But you'd better go now, before someone sees us here. Go on. Off you go." And with that, ladies and gentlemen, there's the end of today's reading session. I'm leaving it on a cliffhanger. Haha. Did he or did he not go with her? We'll find out next Monday. Wow. Okay. Guys, yeah, that's it. If I read any more, it'll be over my 2 hours reading session, and also I'm trying to leave enough chapters for me to read the next session so that it wouldn't be too short. And thank you so much. Yeah, I need to drink water. I need to take care of my throat. It doesn't help that I vape like crazy every day, so that's why my voice is very bad today. Yeah, we are leaving on a cliffhanger. That's pretty awesome. This is I feel like this is the first cliffhanger I ever had in reading in a reading session. I read I was supposed to stop at chapter 15, but I went on for an extra chapter because the bookmark fell off and I didn't know that I was supposed to stop there and I accidentally read an extra chapter, but it went out. It went out. It went out. It went on fine. It was fine. Oh shit. It was fine. And yeah. So, guys, I have to work now. My life is just all working and reading nowadays. And look forward to the next reading that you get for the cliffhanger. Are you guys surprised that I leave it at that? I would, like, seriously, I really wanted to continue, but if I continue, it will be like super long reading session and don't really want that. I want it to be like a properly paced reading session. Aw, alright. Thank you for stopping by today, Danza. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. Also, I'm like cleaning my table now. Live cleaning table. There's so much cat hair on my table, and my table has like a huge black mouse pad, like table mat basically, and just like took up all of the cat hair, cat fur that's like fucking around. Okay, ciao tomate. Yeah, so yeah, I haven't seen you for a bit, Jin. Where did you go? Gonna I haven't seen you around in reading. But then I also wasn't reading a lot last month. Like I only read once last month, I think. Yeah. I'm trying to keep a weekly schedule, like a proper weekly schedule. Oh, my cat is not in the room today. That he was sleeping in the kitchen, so I don't really want to wake him up. Yeah, where have you been? In game or in my stream? How's everyone been? Work and studies? Yeah, same. It's all work for me though. It's all work for me. It's always just work for me non-stop. I don't want to complain about work because they give me money and I shall be appreciative of it. Not complain about money. Not complain about work. Without work, I wouldn't be able to survive to this day. Oh my god, I gotta start working on my work. Shit. I'm very scared. Shit. I need to clean my fucking table first. It's so much fucking fur on my table. It's terrible. It's good but terrible. You know that I have read a comment on Reddit once that there are people who still find their cat fur that passed away like 10 years prior. Like the cat fur is still there. It makes me feel kind of sad to think about that actually. Like they could still find the cat fur like in their wardrobe, in their clothing. Even after the cat has passed away for a long time. No work, no subs. No work, no subs. No. What you mean, like subscription on Twitch? No, I don't really like. I appreciate it if people sub to my channel. Because like for the amount of hours I put into like reading session, it's actually a lot of work, just so you know. And I just recently like bought like 3 books that's like that I can read on stream. So it's basically like for work, you know. And I spend more money on buying books than I got
money from my Twitch channel for reading session basically. And um, yeah, I do have some subs. Some people actually sub to me. I'm very very grateful for that. That's why I feel compelled to do a more scheduled and regular reading session. Definitely, because I don't want them to feel like they are sub to me and then they don't get anything from subbing, you know, and it's not fair to them because they pay monthly subscription fees and I don't do reading, and I just think that's not nice if I do that to them. So I'm really trying to pick up the pace here. Um, who knows? Maybe one day I'll be partner. Haha, ha ha ha, ha 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 ha. Anyway, uh, um, so yeah, I'm just trying. I'm really just trying my best to, yeah, do my work outside from Twitch so that I can have. I'm a freelancer and I do various things. Yes, uh, and uh, and I wish that I feel less guilty doing Noodibles. I don't know what I'm saying, but I wish that I do feel less guilty when I'm doing Noodibles, like because it's like when I'm doing Noodibles, I'm not doing my other work that I should be doing that makes me a lot of money, and and I don't know what I'm saying. I don't know what I'm saying. I'm just babbling non-stop. I don't know how to stop. Um. Anyway, anyway. Thank you for being here today. Work from home gang. Yeah, work from home gang. Hell yeah. I've been work from home since November of 2019. Yeah. That's why it would be nice if I can make like some money out of Twitch, but I mean I do, but not a lot. I do, um, but it still takes out time away from me from doing other work that pays me a lot more. If I were to spend time sitting there and doing my work. Anyways, I'm really hungry. I'm actually really hungry. So I'm gonna go and get some food. Um, and I'm going to get some food and I'm going to go eat the food. And then I'm going to sit here and continue doing all the works that I need to do to survive like a human being, like a normal human being. Um, so until then, the next reading session will be on next Monday, 11 a.m. GMT +8, same place, same time. We will finish up When We Were Orphans by Kazuo Ishiguro, and after that we will be reading Natsume Soseki. And I still don't remember what's the name of that dude who wrote Kafka on the Shore. What's his name? Seriously, somebody tell me. I hate him. I hate him to the point that I don't remember his name. Ha. What's his name? Fuck. He's such a terrible writer. Everyone loves him, but I hate him. I'll do a Google real quick. Haruki Murakami. Yes, Murakami. Yeah, it is Murakami. Jeez. Yeah, fuck Murakami. I'll never read a book from Murakami. Fuck guys. Okay. When we were orphan, we will finish up next Monday, 11 a.m. GMT plus 8. Um, that one was so bad. The Library Adventure book. Was it? Was it the one that I read? I fucking hate him. He's such an incel. Murakami is just a pure incel. Like, he doesn't know what a woman is like even though he's married. Like, he has so little knowledge about women. He's like just a pure Japanese incel. That I'm like, this person doesn't know what a woman thinks, and every female character in his books just is like fucking fucked up women, like damsel in distress, like mentally fucked up woman who waits for like the male lead to save them kind of feeling, and then he would spend like fucking pages describing some wine that he likes or whatever jazz music that he likes. Like, he's just fucking showing the fuck off. Like, he's like, when you read a novel and all you can think of is like this fucking author is just trying to show off what he likes in real life, right? It just takes you out of the book. Like, bruh, like, get a grip of yourself, you motherfucker. Like, you're so full of yourself. Just shut the fuck up and tell me the story, man. You know, it's so like, it just fucking annoy the shit out of me. I hate Murakami. Haruki Murakami, not Hayao Miyazaki. Haruki Murakami, yes, he's so bad. But anyway, my plan is I'm going to be rotating books between Kazuo Ishiguro and Natsume Soseki until I run out of Natsume Soseki's books and Kazuo Ishiguro's book. Then I will start reading books from other writers. Yeah, self-insert. So fucking stupid. Like, just shut the fuck up, man. Just tell me the story, man. And write better female characters that are not fucking mentally fucked up or like sexually charged or like damsel in distress. Like, stop it. Stop. Get some help. You know. So yes, we'll finish When We're Orphans next Monday. I keep saying that non-stop. And then after that, we will be reading Natsume Soseki, Sanshiro. Sanshiro? Yeah, Sanshiro. So after that, so next Wednesday, we'll be reading Natsume Soseki Sanshiro. And then after Sanshiro, yes, exactly. After Sanshiro, we will read a classic Kazuo Ishiguro, Never Let Me Go. I hope you guys will enjoy that. So that's my plan for the next next two books. After that, I'll see what happens, okay? Until then, minasan, until then, I will see you guys next Monday, or maybe tonight if I stream my rating content. We'll see. Until then, thank you so much for attending my humble reading session, and I'll see you guys soon next week, or soon, whenever I stream. Okay? I'll send you all off with my favorite song in the world. Here we go.
Have you ever had a dream that you could know
Thank you so much for listening to my reading today. I'll see you guys soon. Thank you, Jean. Thank you so much once again for dropping by. Thank you for talking to me. Thank you for discussing about reading stuff with me. I really appreciate it. I really love talking about books and reading books and everything. Anyway, thank you, Jean. I'll see you soon. Okay. Thank you, Twisty, for the moderation. Thank you, Tazamina, for dropping by today. I'm so happy that Tasamina made it. Thank you, Mr. Hearts 1995. I think I forgot. I'm so sorry, but I forgot who you are in game. But thank you so much for dropping by. And I'll see you guys soon. Bye bye. ありがとうございました。Bye. Thank you so much.